evening and welcome to the October 16th, 2018 City Council regular meeting. I'm Mayor Debbie Bertlin. Could the city clerk please call roll?
Mayor Debbie Bertlin.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Salim Neese.
Here.
Councilmember Bruce Bassett. Councilmember Wendy Weicker. Councilmember David Wiesentiner. And Councilmember Benson Wong.
Here.
Great, thank you so much. So I think it's probably pretty apparent we don't yet have a quorum, although we are anticipating a quorum in the very near future. So with that, we will be pushing off just till the next agenda item, the actual agenda approval. We're starting this evening with a study session, and so we'll go ahead and just move right into that. The study session is AB 5492 regarding the 2019-2020 proposed budget presentation and distribution. And for that, I welcome City Manager Julie Underwood.
Good evening, Council. For the record, your City Manager, Julie Underwood, and I am pleased to present my first balanced budget to the Council. And as you know, it's required by state law that the budget is balanced. So you went through this summer where we go through a exercise of really examining our forecasts, our assumptions, and using those assumptions to build our budget. So we will review what those assumptions are shortly. Tonight, what you have before you is that big binder. That is your proposed budget. We won't get into all the details, of course, since you just received it. I will do a high level, mainly the city manager's message focuses on kind of the changes that you'll see in this budget compared to your last budget. And then Chip will review the revenue estimates again. Those are estimates that helped us build the budget. And whenever we see those estimates, those revenue estimates and those expenditure estimates not coming in line, either, as you know, we have to find new revenues, or in all likely case, we have to reduce in order to, again, balance the budget. This is a total budget of $143.2 million. This includes a total general fund and YFS fund operating budget of $3.5 million in 19 and $3.5 million in 2020. Your capital budget is $32.8 million. Again, we have a very solid, sound financial condition. We have a Moody's AAA credit rating. We have successfully completed 23 years of clean audits, and we are also being fiscally prudent and setting aside monies in a rainy day fund or contingency fund of about 1.5 months of expenditures. And of course, we, based on council direction, would like to grow that to about 2 months of expenditures. One thing you'll note, hopefully, in my message is really the limited resources and the increasing costs that the city faces. We are a bedroom community. We receive the majority of our revenue through property tax. And as you know, property tax is limited to a 1% per year increase, with the exception of allowing for new construction. Increasing costs mostly really are centered around personnel costs. As a service organization, 70% of our budget is around salaries and benefits. So a number of unfunded mandates and drivers impact those personnel costs. Many of us are, of course, very familiar with the Affordable Care Act. I think the significant thing about the Affordable Care Act is that it requires that all employees actually would be insured that maybe in the past would not have otherwise been insured. Minimum wage, as we know, minimum wage really does drive up all wages. The inflation rate, as you know, we have a competitive practice at marking our cost of living adjustments to the CPIW in June, and that was at 3.6%. The legislature enacted a one-time increase of a COLA for PERS 1 retirees of 1.5%. The employer has to pay that. Paid sick leave benefit. As many of you know, in the past, sick leave applied to benefited employees. Now, every employee gets sick leave. They get to accrual sick leave, and we actually have to account for that. And then most recently, the legislature enacted paid family and medical leave. Like unemployment insurance, this provides really a similar program, an insurance program for all employees. And it's very similar to family medical leave for those reasons, birth of a child, adoption, aging parents, those types of things. Of course, all of these things are really, I think, noble, really well-intended, but in particular, the last two bulleted items really do have an implication on our budget, and generally you will find that around our 24/7 operations, where you'll see increase in overtime costs. So not that we are not trying to control overtime costs. Of course we are. I know that is something our police and fire constantly track, but it becomes very difficult when you have these factors that play into it. We have also gotten a huge premium increase with our insurance pool, and this is largely driven by the claims history over the last 5 years. So again, a lot of that not within our control. And then most recently, I alerted the council to a Labor and Industries. They are using a methodology for landscaper prevailing wage that would add, assuming you maintained the same service levels over the next biennium, we estimate $750,000 to our budget.
Is that a potential, or is that in fact passed?
Right now, their methodology stands. As you know, we are working, you communicated to the 41st delegation the concern we have with this. Our city attorney has reached out to Labor and Industries. I believe Association Washington Cities has this on their radar as well, but this will have a significant, not only just for cities, right, but there are school districts that contract out their landscaping and their mowing. It will have major impacts. Yeah.
I think we've got Salim and then Benson.
So my question is, did that get worked into the budget? If so, when does it begin? It's not. So
We'll have to figure it out.
So in other words, so it's not in the budget, not at this time.
Right.
A
A
portion.
portion.
So
I-
when we go into the budget, we'll get into those details.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I think the idea being that is beyond our means, so we're going to have to probably adjust our service levels.
Okay. Benson?
I was just curious, as far as the definition of a landscaper, how many employees are we talking about? I mean, how broad is that definition?
Well, this is usually our contractors. And so they will pass those costs on to us. And so the 750 is over 2 years that we're estimating the increase being. We would do a bid and obviously see if in fact this is materializes, but it's pretty significant. As you can imagine, this is why we're pushing back on this. Note, Washington state labor laws prohibit the city from making unilateral decisions around reducing salaries and benefits for represented employees. As you know, roughly about half of your employees are represented, so we would want to just pay attention to any changes that we might want to make there. And I know this year we have a number, I think we have our fire contract that we'll be negotiating. I think next year is AFSCME, and then I think the subsequent year is police. So we try to stagger them, and so that's always on our mind as well. So one of the neat things that the staff has pulled together really is around what have we done to kind of keep our budget balance, right? We don't have a credit card. We don't have a home equity line of credit. We really have to pay for things really in cash, so to speak. There's no way to do it. And so I think the staff has always really operated from stay within your budget, don't live beyond your means. And so I also will note that there is not a philosophy of spend down the budget, spend everything. And in fact, I think directors have really been very, I think, collaborative in their approach and recognizing if a service isn't necessary, it's changed, they would, make that known to us. I think the first example is on the screen, the fact that we eliminated a detective, and I think maybe that was reprogrammed into an area that the organization needed more support. I think it might have been our maybe IT support. So there's a very collaborative environment. We've done early retirements to retirement incentive for firefighters. We've done smart irrigation for our city parks, retrofitted our streetlights to LED. I think obviously we've done things like extend the useful life of various expensive equipment like fire equipment, police patrol vehicles, and our regular fleet. And of course, most recently, we were successful in moving our employees to a new medical plan, resulting in quite a bit of savings. So there is a long list in my budget message, but I think what I would like to leave you with is there is a practice in the organization of finding efficiencies, reducing costs, and also trying to continue to maintain service levels. As you know, your community has very high expectations of us. 95% of Islanders are satisfied, very satisfied with Mercer Island as a place to live. 95% feel really very safe on the island. 94% believe this is a great place to raise a family. And 92% are satisfied with their overall quality of life in the city. So that is a high standard, and your budget is really designed to try to maintain that. In addition, yes.
Question. I'm going back to your cost saving. And
Yes.
And so I'm just curious whether or not there's any kind of written directive from you in terms of to your staff, to your management team in terms of cost savings, or is it something that I know people have said it's part of the DNA, but I'm just more, I'm really curious whether or not there is some sort of written directive or policy.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. In fact, I know most recently at our leadership team meeting, I've really asked the directors to think about an area in their department they'd really like to focus on. What, and it would make a huge difference, whether it's in reducing manual labor hours, whether it's a process improvement. And we're just beginning that process. I am also going with a team, a small team of leadership team members. We are getting comped free training with the Drucker Institute. So if you're familiar with Peter Drucker, he studied, I think, Toyota, really studied management principles. I think his famous quote, which I love, is culture ate strategy for breakfast. So in other words, your organizational culture, the place, your workplace really does drive performance and really does drive outcomes. So we are invited to about a day and a half training. It's, again, comp to us because I have great relationships with my peers in the state. So we are heading over to SWIM and getting that training through the Drucker Institute. And why is that important? It's focused on performance measurement, performance management. We will learn an exercise called abandonment, where it focuses us on our mission, our customers, and really, are there areas that we should abandon? And I think it's a tough exercise to go through, but we are beginning to go through that. Yeah.
You know, one of the things I've been thinking about is the increase from 10% to 12.5% on the contingency fund. And I think an opportunity for you, because this is essentially an unfunded mandate, is to go to the departments, and to the extent that they're impacted because they're funded by the general fund, have them have a target for their contribution to that goal, right? So it becomes an expense on the P&L side, essentially, funding that additional goal. But I think what it does is it takes a department that is, and I'm not going to pick a department, but it takes the cultural thinking of, if you don't spend it, you'll lose it, away, because they're expensing it to the contingency, but so they make it part of the expense profile of the department until you reach that goal. But I hope you would take some sort of action as early as you can, to try and find a way to get departments funding that unfunded mandate.
So budget assumptions to develop and prepare the budget. Obviously, Plan A is there is no levy lid lift. It's really, at this point, hoping the council will take advantage of the 1% growth limit that you are allowed to by law, but currently no levy lid lift. The temporary utility tax also expires at the end of 2018. I know you felt strongly that you wanted to peg that to the Sound Transit settlement, and you are staying true to your word on that. There's no increase in the B&O rate, tax rate. In addition, we are eliminating the 1.7% of water utility tax transfer, and really the water fund will go and maintain the fire hydrant maintenance going forward. In addition, also according to your direction, we're consolidating the beautification fund with the general fund, so that fund will go away, and then that nets us about a $225,000. Also keep in mind that the programs that were funded under the beautification fund also end up kind of competing with the general fund programs as well, whereas before it was really, I think, protected. And so you'll see some reductions based on the fact that the programs there are competing. In addition, we are setting aside some one-time monies, again, to build up your contingency fund, your rainy day fund, and by the end of 2020, we should have $4.6 million set aside. We are using about $2 million in one-time resources to balance the budget. So let me repeat that. We are deficit spending $2 million in order to do our best to maintain the services our community wants. In addition, $1.2 million in expenditure reductions.
So that $2 million, where is that coming from? Is that surplus or?
Right, surplus. Remember, right after the recession, you had, and many, many cities had a great economic boom. What does that mean? Really, it's your construction sales tax dollars that really account for the surplus. It's been great to have the amount of surplus, again, generated by construction sales tax dollars. But we do not believe, and as you know, our forecast does not show that continuing into the future. And then, as I mentioned, it still requires, even though we are deficit spending, just over 1.2 million in reductions. In addition to all of that background, I am trying to present a budget that supports your goals and your work plan. So you'll see some requests, largely one-time money requests that support your goals and your work plan. So some of those initiatives that support your goals, of course, you are very fully committed, I know, to the commuter parking and mixed-use project. So you'll see a CIP project for that dedicated to purchasing the Tully site. You'll see water and sewer utility rate model reviews. Of course, the fiscal sustainability plan is included, as well as funding for organizational efficiency assessments. We plan to review the transportation and parks impact fees, and the parks impact fee will really be driven by the PROS plan, the Parks Recreation Open Space Plan. You see that on there. We would like to fund an ADA transition plan. I think this is an opportunity area for us, and we think would really go a long way in helping us identify really gaps in our infrastructure. Urban forest management plan is included, as well as bringing really in-house our CCTV for sewer. And combining the CCTV with a vector jetter truck. So you'll see more information in my city manager's message on that. And then,
Quick
yes.
question on the Vector truck. That's an outsourced service that we do right now. Is that what we always see in the payables as parking lot sweeping? Is Vector truck, something like that, is some sort of
It's
vendor?
a different truck, a different equipment.
Same
Is it
vendor.
the same
Yeah.
vendor?
No, I'm pretty sure those are, we have some budget hawks out there in the public TV land that like to look at the parking lot sweeping and say that we spend a lot of money on sweeping, but it's actually Vector trucking. And so we're going to bring that in-house as we did street sweeping.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. We think that's going to be very helpful, of course, in reducing our risk under our sewer utility. And then contrary, we're proposing more, really more outsourcing of the stormwater CCTV. And then a proposal to continue contract permitting staff, of course, again, funded by development fees. And then continuing our CART services.
So Julie, just to clarify, when these
Yes.
come forward in the actual budget discussions we have, the source
the
of
depart-
funding will
The
be
source-
identified, because there's a very different set of funding sources for
Good
each of
point,
these.
yes. And we plan to review these within the department that these are housed. So, yes, sir.
Just a question. You know, I note that with respect to a lot of these plans, staff anticipates hiring, retaining consultants. And so
Yes.
I guess a question I have is, of these plans, are they required, or are they, again, something that is desirable? If,
Some of them are required.
can you identify which ones might be required?
Benson, I'm going to suggest that we hold some of the
If-
detailed questions.
We will
until
come
we
back
go
to
through the
that.
budget.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So you want a distinction between required, okay, we can do that. So staffing
Can I
change,
just ask a quick question on the 3.5 FTEs on the DSG? Is that continuing? It's like continuing. Is it through the biennium, or, and if something changed in terms of permitting dropping off, That could change through the biennium?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So council, I can see we're kind of on the edge digging into some of this, and I'm as guilty as anybody.
And if you have questions, and I know Chip has made himself available one-on-one
Yep.
as
So
well.
let's go for some clarifying questions here. The extent to which there's specific answers that we need tonight, perhaps we can, if possible, call them out to staff
Yeah.
and/or reserve them
And
for
we'll
the
come back
detailed-
prepared for an answer.
Okay.
Thank you. You have seen on the end of August a preliminary, really a preliminary budget recommendation with this reduction of 1.2 million. And let me preface this by saying, obviously, I consulted very closely with the department directors. We try to target some of these based on taking advantage of retirements that we see in the future, maybe some positions that currently are vacant, contract positions that we know the contract ends. So we're trying to really do our best to maintain your organization and also address this $1.2 million target. So what you see here are an attempt at doing some of that. So in addition, I know it seems really odd to include a recommendation to increase the public records staff in our police department, but my chief tells me this is his number one priority. It is a unfunded mandate. It is, they had a full-time public records office staff member in the past. They reduced it, but the demand and the volume is such that they have requested this position return to a 1 FTE. So additional reductions, you'll see, regrettably, a reduction in our Arch Trust Fund contribution, elimination of our lifeguards, a reduction in our customer service and operating hours at our community center, reducing some special events. A lot of those events are not, they're free events. And then reducing our support in the town center that really, of course, makes it a great town center. So the baskets, the medians, and our support for farmers market. So going beyond this biennium budget, you will see we are looking at 3.7 million in 21, 4.1 in 22, and gets higher and higher. What I would recommend, because obviously you did support putting a levy out to the voters in November, that should the levy fail, I would recommend that I work immediately with the staff to do our best to start reducing beyond what I'm proposing in the budget. So how would that materially happen? Really, it would result in when there are vacancies, I would just not fill those vacancies, is one example. And so you would start seeing that happen. Some downsides to that is they may happen in service areas that you may not have chosen. So we are leaving that a bit up to chance, but I think given where we are and if we don't see new revenue and with these huge looming deficits, I think we have to get ahead of it. I would just recommend that we just start doing that. Okay, Chip is going to come up and review the revenues.
Good evening. I only have 3 slides after this. I've kept this really short and sweet. We're focusing on operating budget revenues, not capital revenues. We're not talking about utility rates. And in particular, we'll look at the general fund and YFS fund. We'll look at the major revenues. For the general fund, that's revenues that are more than $1 million. Then I'll lump all the others into all other revenues, and then we'll look at the total revenues. To help us make this useful, I will try to compare what's budgeted in 1920 to what was forecast back in June. So you can kind of see some of the differences, and I'll call out what are some of the drivers of those differences each way. General fund, here's the whole thing on one page. What I want you to focus on is just note, and I have this broken out, so I got the 19 budget here. And remember, the budget is,
Chip, I'm sorry, is this part of the budget?
no, it is not.
Okay.
I mean, the revenues are in, there's a revenue sources section, but this is a separate presentation. The budget represents a revision to the forecast. The previous forecast was effectively back in June, okay? I've gotten a few more months of data since then. This is all finalized in the August timeframe for the budget document that we worked on in September and in October. So we compare the 19 budget to the 19 forecast, note what the difference is, and then the 20 budget to the 20 forecast, note what the difference is. Let's look at the 19 column, the very bottom here. You'll see that the budget is $208,000 less than what was forecast. So that's less than 1%, that's less than 2/3 of 1%, to put it in perspective. In 2020, it's almost spot on, very little change overall. Let's talk about each one. Property tax. The budget's $12,000 higher, 19, 26,000 in 2020. Very minimal, that's all about new construction. I simply looked at the new construction numbers and bumped it up a little bit. Sales tax in 19. Sales tax, I bumped up the budget 51,000 in 19 and 49K in 2020. That's just taking a few more months of data. The construction component of sales tax, that's about 43% of the total sales tax pie. That finally turned the corner in June and July and August. And while it's not hugely bigger than the same months last year, it is higher than the same months last year. And so I adjusted my forecast accordingly. Utility B&O taxes, down a little bit, 18,000 in 19 and 24K in 2020. That's all about cable utility tax. You remember back in September when I presented the second quarter financial status report, I noted that cable utility tax and also the cable franchise fees were down 7.5%. Prior to this year, they had flattened out over the last 2 years, and then they're down, both of them are down 7.5% this year compared to the first half of last year. I factored that into the forecast. License and permit fees. This is the most significant change, and we'll talk about it. I have a special slide dedicated to this very one. This is development fees, business license fees, and the cable franchise fee. So hang tight on that one, and I'll explain this $200,000 drop in 19. Park and rec fees are down a little bit, 38K in 19 and 71K in 2020. This is all about the community center rental fees. They simply have, we've just hit the top of the market, and so growth is flat. It's about $545,000 is the projection for this year, 19 and 20 as well, just flat. That's the biggest component of this particular revenue slice, and that's what's pulling it down. I had projected some growth in my forecast. EMS revenues are up 49K in 2019 and then 51K in 2020. That's wholly due to the ambulance transport fee. We will be proposing to increase that fee beginning January 1 of next year. That's what accounts for that about 50K difference. AMR, which is a primary provider, they're significantly increasing their fees either this year or beginning the January of next year, and so we're following suit. And then all other revenues are down about $58,000 in 2019. That's wholly due to municipal court fines. Those had been around $400,000. We are tracking closer to $340,000 to $350,000 this year, and that's reflected in the forecast. So again, overall, down about $208,000 in 19, and then up a little bit in 2020. So let's look at the license permit zoning fees and what's going on there. You'll notice development fees. They're down about $100,000 in 19, but then up $136,000 in 2020. This is just a timing thing. I had Evan go back and look very carefully at the latest, information on permits and valuations, and so across both years, it cancels each other out. We're a little bit to the net positive there in 2020. So there's just a shifting of relative to the forecasted revenues on development fees. Cable franchise fees, I already noted, those are down 7.5% for the first half of this year compared to last year, so that's reflected here. business license fees are going down because beginning January 1 of next year, the state will be taking over, in essence, and part of the arrangement and us working with the state is all businesses that make less than $2,000 of gross revenue, they are exempt from the license fee. Well, that's about 1,200 businesses in our case. So that reduces that by $36,000. I had not anticipated that in my forecast. So that accounts for the $205,000 decrease in 19 and the $6K increase in 2020. Questions on that? I should mention that Evan and I are keeping a close eye on this, and when we get into November, if there's a need to make a further adjustment, we'll come back to the council in November, probably at your second meeting on November 20th.
Just so you can set us up for that, what criteria would you use to establish needing to change it? Because otherwise, sometimes you get concerned that the numbers change. They might change relatively small.
Yeah, I normally
amounts, but-
don't look at this one, but because this is there's such uncertainty in the future, if we get more relevant information between now and then, I want to factor that into the forecast. Normally, I wouldn't touch it. The only one that I typically touch is REIT and for CIP, but in this case, we're making an exception for development fees because so much hangs in the balance on it.
Thanks.
Finally, last slide, Youth and Family Services Fund. Thrift shop sales are your biggest good news there. Relative to the forecast, we bumped it up $50,000 plus in 19 and then 91,000 in 2020. That's all about the experiment, the staffing experiment going on there. It continues to do well, and so we bumped up our revenue forecast on thrift shop sales. General fund support, flat at 400,000, no change there. Foundation support, there's a little bit of a drop there. This is related to the fact that there are service level reductions in here, and so the foundation beginning next year will be committing to 10% of the YFS fund budget or department budget, and because there's a cuts, which I didn't reflect or anticipate in my YFS fund forecast, there's a little bit of a drop here in that revenue. It's very minor. And then all other revenues up slightly. Overall, it's up $59,000 in 19 and $81,000 in 2020, again, primarily due to the thrift shop sales forecast. That's it in a nutshell. Questions on those revenues? Okay.
So this evening, as you know, we're not kicking off the discussion. We're just presenting the budget book. I'm sure you'll read it all week until our next meeting next Tuesday, where we are devoting the entire meeting talking about the operating budget. And I thought it would be helpful to have each of the department directors present their budget. We'll also review employee compensation and benefits. You'll discuss the CIP on November 5th and November 20th. Make your final, provide your final direction to the staff. Adopt your ordinance for the beautification fund, the property tax, your fees and such. And then you are due to adopt your budget on December 4th. Any questions about that?
Yeah, so given that this is a substantial document, if you were to provide your council and your public with guidance in terms of where to focus, even just for next week to begin with, what sections would you?
Section F.
Section F. Okay.
Section F,
So for those who don't,
which is still a big
it's
section.
a very big section, but it helps. Thank you.
But the staff does I think, a really good job of, it's called, what is it called? Analysis. Oh, okay. The operating budget analysis. So what you tend to look at is how has this changed from previous budgets? So every department will have a analysis, kind of at a glance. You'll be able to see the changes, and then of course we also have information like FTEs by department and that sort of thing. But since next week we are focused on all the departments, that's probably where we'd kind of want you to take a look at that and come prepared with your questions. Obviously, providing questions in advance is appreciated, but I certainly understand because that is a lot of material to get through. So Couldn't have done this with the awesome team that we have here. So my deep gratitude to Chip, Juan, Francie, Allie, Chris, Deb, who else am I? Everyone. Amanda, for putting the book together and getting it. I think they all worked on Saturday. So I just am so grateful that they are here making all of this come together. So with that, any questions?
So council, any questions about content, content that Julie covered tonight, anything about the process? I think as we've discussed, given the timelines that we're working under and also given the amount of time that we've actually spent on the budget this past spring and summer, the assumption is that when we show up these next couple weeks, we're pretty much on top and on point of the content that's in here.
As far as we review this notebook, the budget policies, how do you want us to, I mean, again, that just provides us kind of an overview guidance, but help me as far
I
as
think it
that.
would be good for you to refresh yourself on the policies. It's generally in the back of the book. I think I thought we reviewed those policies.
If there's significant changes, we'll call them out.
Yeah. If you have significant changes, we will spend time on those. But of course, we're assuming those are the policies you want going forward. Yeah.
Okay.
Salim, when did you do
So one of the things is I'm going to struggle with is the unfunded mandate of the contingency fund and how that relates to the departments. And I'm guessing that I won't find in here an adjusted general fund kind of revenue flow by department that backs DSG out. So my thinking is we're going to go from 10% to 12.5% on a contingency fund. DSG, when permit revenues drop, gets ramped down. So they don't really need to provide for a contingency fund unfunded liabilities like Parks and Rec or like, the police department or the fire department. Is there going to be something that will kind of show us who, by percentage of general fund adjusted for DSG, what each department might be responsible for?
In the way of the contingency?
Yeah, that 2.5% increase.
Remember, we're funding it with one-time money
Yeah.
at the end of this year.
Right. Yeah.
Or maybe it's just a question doesn't need an answer right now. Can something like that be provided?
We did not obviously structure the budget or the contingency fund that way. We're really relying on surplus. And my experience has been every year, every department has a surplus. Usually it's really around personnel. There's always some personnel changes. So I feel pretty confident they can contribute to the contingency fund.
No, I think it's
Yeah.
important to give them a goal. And if one department relies heavily on the general fund, for them to know, what their 2.5% nut would be based on their pro rata use of the general fund, I think helps me think through, a general fund heavy department and how much savings or surplus they need to kind of present.
And maybe we can talk offline about that.
Wendy?
So I'm looking at your high-level reduction in the mental health counselors, and I wonder, as part of our discussion going forward, and certainly after the November vote, if we can have some options for leaving those positions whole, like what other cuts or reductions or not filling other positions can we look at to keep that specific program whole? I distinctly remember 40 people showing up at a meeting not long ago, pretty clear about wanting to make sure those positions were preserved. So I'm wondering if there's a way to look at lawn mowing or whatever other cuts we can do, whatever moving around we can do, or maybe not being so aggressive with the contingency fund to hold those positions steady as we consider what to do, however the outcome of the November election is.
You definitely have some tools in your toolbox you have preserved. I guess my only hesitation is when I look beyond that and I start seeing $4 and $5 million, I think you're going to have a hard time funding public safety.
I know they're going to be hard cuts. I'd like like to see what the options are between one position or another, or one department or another, and where we do have that latitude.
Yeah.
So if there's some way to pull a list together, I know we did some of that work in the CAG. Can we have a little menu here of choices around which cuts are going to be, they're all going to be hard, but some are going to be harder than others. So if we can have an easy list for us and our public to maybe consider as we go into this, that would be helpful.
I would also encourage all council members, and to the extent that the public wants, it's going to be a painful conversation regarding positions and cuts. And everybody has a set of priorities, but equally, I know that I personally would like to hear from fellow council members what specific priorities that they would have, if not from the city manager, what priorities our community would have, if not those of the city manager. And I think this is really going to require community dialogue. If people want to see fewer services in the councilors, or in the park maintenance, or in public safety, and or whatever, we do want to hear from you, because it's going to be uncomfortable. So I'd like some of the responsibility to sit with those of us up here, some degree of responsibility to sit out there in the public, as well as looking to our staff and leadership. So it's a heartfelt request.
Okay. If there's nothing more to add on that, we can wrap it up and get ready for your business meeting.
Well, I think before we take just a short break, now that we do have quorum here, I'm going to go back at one item in the agenda and ask if we can have an agenda approval
So
from
moved.
council. So, first and second, all in favor of approving the agenda, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No? Okay, so the agenda has been approved. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and we'll reconvene at 7 o'clock for regular business. Thank you.
Page 68 is 21.2.
Okay, so good evening and welcome back to the October 16th, 2018 City Council regular meeting. The council has just completed a study session regarding the 2019-2020 proposed budget presentation and distribution. So tonight, we have two items of special business, and they cover the Marine Patrol staff recognition as well as breast cancer awareness. So it's great to see everybody here in the audience. We have a full house. The first item is actually the Agenda Bill 5488, which is recognition of Mercer Island's Police Department's Marine Patrol staff, Sergeant Brian Knoll, and Marine Support Officer Greg Levinson. So the great news is Officer Knoll received the 2018 National Association of State Boating Law Administrators Washington State Boating Officer of the Year Award. Officer Greg Levinson received the 2018 State of Washington Recreational Boating Safety Marine Law Enforcement Officer of the Year. So to elaborate on this, I welcome Chief Ed Holmes.
Even happier. There we go. Okay, so it's a pleasure to reintroduce Brian Noel. Has been a sergeant with us in charge of the Marine Patrol program for a number of years, and then Greg Levinson, the Marine Support Officer. And I'm really proud of the work they do. I'm also equally proud of the support we get from not only the council, but from the community at large for our programs, to include the very important Marine Patrol program. So I know you have a couple of those awards, the actual plaques they received. So I know you wanted to have a chance to give those to them, and congratulate them yourself, Mayor.
So this is the fun part. So the first one is for Officer Levinson. He gets a beautiful plaque. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's an And this is your chance to send a message to the public. If there's anything that you've learned in the course of this work that you think our public needs to know.
Boating safety is an important aspect that we deal with, and it's important to be aware of all the safety aspects when you're out boating.
Okay, and the next plaque of sorts is for Brian Knoll, and this is the Boating Law Enforcement Officer of the Year. So your turn, too, to share important messages with our public.
Thank you. Nobody told me I was going to have to talk. But first, I want to first thank my administration and my chief for the support they show. Of course, I have bosses. I couldn't do this without him and them, and for the support the city council shows us in the past. And then, just like Greg says, I'm kind of famous for putting things in blunt terms. The water can be fun, but it can be hazardous, so be safe out there.
So I thought, actually, Ed, Chief Holmes, I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute, because I think one of the things that isn't widely understood is how much Marine Patrol service our team provides, because it's just not Mercer Island, is it? Doesn't it extend to multiple communities?
Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, it does. So we have a contract with the city of Renton and a contract with the city of Bellevue. Renton actually pays a fee, and with Bellevue, we do an exchange of services for that, for them. The Marine Patrol also, we have a joint police fire dive team, so that is active as well. We try very hard to do educational efforts as well as enforcement efforts, but it's a lot of work out there. I've gone on the ride the boat with the officers, and some of the stuff they get involved with it's really difficult under really adverse conditions sometimes, under stormy seas, and at nighttime it's really hard. So my hat's off to all the Marine Patrol officers. We have 18 of our regular patrol officers who are also trained in Marine Patrol. So virtually almost 24/7, we can be to the boat within minutes if there's an emergency out there. So we take it seriously. We obviously recognize the fact that we're a littoral island, and with that comes the responsibility of keeping our waters safe as well for the residents and those who like to recreate on the water. So it's a lot of work. My hat's off to both these guys behind me, and I'm really proud of them and the awards they received. So thank you.
So I'm going to just throw in a couple words of my own, and that is, in my role, and I think many of us on council have the opportunity to work with many of our fellow council members and mayors and deputy mayors, and I know that I consistently get a lot of great positive feedback from some of our Lake Washington communities who know and see and appreciate all that you're doing on behalf of this greater community of folks who are surrounded by water on a daily basis. So tremendous thanks, and come on forward, we'll get a picture. You have to come on to the forward. No podium.
Thank you.
Can we give a final round? Because they're awesome. It's fun to be on the lake in the summer when it's warm, but these guys are out there when it's not so nice. Okay, so next item of special business is actually Agenda Bill 5485, Breast Cancer Awareness Month proclamation. And for that, I'm very fortunate to be joined by Chief Ed Holmes again, and Fire Chief Steve Heitman. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and read the proclamation, and then we're going to ask them to share some words and some actually very interesting and exciting initiatives that they're undertaking themselves as departments. So whereas, while considerable progress has been made in the fight against breast cancer, it remains the most commonly diagnosed cancer and one of the leading causes of death among women in the United States. And whereas 1 in 8 women in the United States will be diagnosed with breast cancer in her lifetime, and each year it is estimated that 220,000 women in the United States will be diagnosed, and more than 40,000 will die as a result. Whereas October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, an annual campaign to increase awareness about the disease, and whereas this October we recognize breast cancer survivors, those battling the disease, their families and friends who are a tireless source of love and encouragement, and applaud the efforts of our medical professionals and researchers working to find a cure for this disease. And whereas the Mercer Island Police and Fire Departments are raising awareness of breast cancer by wearing pink patches and pink t-shirts and are selling them to the public so as to raise funds that will go directly to benefit cancer research and treatment. And whereas Breast Cancer Awareness Month is an opportunity to unite all community members to prevent breast cancer deaths through increased education and regular screening. Now, therefore, I, Debbie Bertland, Mayor of the City of Mercer Island, Washington, on behalf of its City Council, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2018 as Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Thank you. So we have the two chiefs here because I think they have some very special efforts underway that I want them to share with you and ask that you will participate in.
Yes, thank you. So there are actually 3 people that are going to receive this proclamation from the mayor. And so I'd like to call Pete Erickson. He's a retired detective with us, was with our department for almost 30 years. And as he works his way up here, I would also like to call Dr. Kaplan up here. And then Chief Heitman will introduce someone from his fire department as well. And just a couple words. So we undertook this effort, and I'll let Pete talk a little bit about the Pink Patch Project because he was the one that initiated it and got me thinking about it in the first place and actually paid for all the patches himself. So this is a ton of work on his part, both time and money-wise. And then the fire department is also working on efforts to further research and cancer prevention, and I'll let the fire folks talk about that. But this all goes toward the people such as Dr. Kaplan who actually do the actual work. So I'm just super pleased and thrilled that we have a doctor from our community who lives here. I've known his wife for years when I was the SRO and she was on the school board. So it's kind of a nice reunion. I saw her tonight. But all these efforts go toward the actual people doing the work. So let's have Steve introduce his union president, and then we'll let the 3 guests speak a few words.
All right, thank you. My effort in this was to okay it in the uniform policy for the firefighters to wear pink t-shirts the entire month since it was outside of that. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite Lieutenant Ray Austin, who's our IFF Local 1762 president, up because he's carrying the load on this effort and has put forth a ton of effort. So I'll turn it over.
So go ahead, Pete. We'll just go in order, I guess, so then you want to give the...
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure. I've spent a lot of time with the city of Mercer Island. Got to meet some old friends tonight, and glad to be here. The Pink Patch Project is not something that I came up with. Its history goes to Southern California, where several agencies are participating in this for the month of October, and they've been doing it for several years. There's about half a dozen agencies in the state of Washington that are doing it right now, and hopefully it's just being able to give back to the community because everybody in this room's life has been touched by cancer in some way. Thank you.
Come on up, Ray.
Thanks. Hi. Firefighters across the nation are wearing pink to raise awareness for breast cancer and raising funds for a number of different charities. Here at home, Chief Heitman was nice enough to agree to allow us to wear the pink t-shirts on duty. We chose Fred Hutch here in Seattle as our charity, and we're raising money for Fred Hutch. If you want to give to our GoFund campaign, it's on the MIFD website, and it'd be great. Everybody has a special lady or ladies in their life, and this touches everybody, and so it's important that we get behind this. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I'd just like to say thank you to all these folks for doing this. This is, for me, a very personal thing. I've worked in breast cancer, both seeing patients and doing research for a long time. And this is a very, very exciting time in breast cancer. We have reduced the death rate of breast cancer about 20% in this country in the last 15 years. but there's a very long way to go, and we're at a very exciting time where a lot of new science is coming to bear. And so it's really critical that we have the resources to do this. We're fortunate enough to live in a city where there are a number of institutions doing great work in here. Fred Hutch is fabulous. There are a lot of great patient advocacy groups working as well. And it's particularly important here because while you may or may not know this, Puget Sound has one of the highest, if not the highest, incidence of breast cancer in the world. The three highest areas in the United States are Puget Sound, the Bay Area, and Long Island, New York, of all things. So it's a wonderful thing to be doing in general, but very, very pertinent to our own local situation. So I just love to thank everybody for pitching in and doing this.
So I think, again, I'd just like to conclude with a tremendous round of thanks and applause for everybody, because it starts with research, people who can help support that research, and equally people who are raising awareness so that we all go get those screenings and tests that we all need so very, very much. So with that, again, to an amazing community, my personal and I believe council's very deep thanks. Yes, it's a family event. You guys are doing the hard, you should be in front. Thank you for coming. Thank you. You're gonna have to scoot forward. Super. Again, thank you.
Thank you.
So there was a very specific piece of logistics that we wanted to call out. There's some flyers here if you want to know where you can go pick up your pink patches. And Ray, I'm going to put you on the spot. If people wanted to get a pink T-shirt, can they do that?
We've got just a few. Our fundraising mechanism is the GoFundMe page, and we just got a few T-shirts. If you drop by the station and ask, we might be able to get you one. Okay?
Thank you.
Extra large.
So now they're going to return and make sure that the Mercer Island waters and communities are safe for the rest of the evening. So with that, we'll move forward in the agenda. And next on the list is the city manager's report. And for that, we will welcome City Manager Julie Underwood.
Good evening, Council. Want to congratulate our Mercer Island Police Department for helping us achieve this recognition of the second safest city in Washington. A report released by SafeWise identified the 20 safest cities in the state of Washington. And what they did is they actually evaluated data. So it's reported data that comes to the FBI. And it's really centered around violent crimes per 1,000 people. We came in ahead of other East Side cities like Sammamish, Kirkland, Bellevue, and Issaquah. So really proud of our police department for really creating a safe community for us to live in. You might recall the city has recently been announced as a Tree City USA. So in celebration, we are kicking off Arbor Day and a tree planting celebration this coming Saturday, October 20th at 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Luther Burbank Park. We'll have food, music, lots of trees to plant, And we are looking for volunteers. In fact, I think we're estimating maybe about 200 volunteers. So this is also a big event by Mountain to Sounds Greenway. So really looking forward to partnering with them on that. And so you can go to mountainsgreenway.org/volunteer to get more information and to sign up. I know I will be there with my family planting trees. Also, our commuter parking and town center project is moving along. We have an open house scheduled for Monday, October 22nd, 6:30 to 8:30. At this point, we have narrowed down the 9 submissions to 5 semifinalists. So that evening will be designed very similar to an open house, where we'll have the ability for participants to come talk one-on-one with the developer, ask them questions. We'll be seeking comments from comment cards. They'll also provide about a 10-minute presentation. But given a number of semifinalists, we had to design it and structure this way just so we can make sure everyone has enough time for the presentation. So we'll probably start off with an open house style, move into presentations, and then go back into an open house style. It'll be at the community center, and this will help us really narrow down, hopefully, to our top 2 finalists that will return to council. And currently, that is scheduled to return to council on November 15th. The new mural at West Mercer Way is now complete, so we're inviting the entire community to meet the artists that were behind the project on Thursday, October 25th at 4 p.m. at the Aubrey Davis Park near the project site. We'll have light refreshments. We'll learn more about the artistic process and head over to the mural to see all the details for ourselves. The city's annual fall recycling event is only 2 weeks away, and it's time to start gathering your materials. Rain or shine, it'll be held on Saturday, October 27th, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., and it's at a different location. So make a note. It's not going to be at the boat launch. It will be at the South Luther Burbank parking lot. So South Luther Burbank parking lot. Come safely dispose of all your old equipment, electronics, appliances, other household items. It's a great event, a great way for you to properly dispose of your materials. And then protect our kids, families, and environment by properly disposing of your unwanted and expired medicines. So on Saturday, October 27th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the loading dock here at City Hall, you can safely dispose of expired, unwanted, or unused prescription medications. This is part of a nationwide drug take-back day. It's a one-day event, and it provides our residents a no-cost, anonymous collection of unwanted, expired medicines. Many of you know medicines in the home are a leading cause of accidental child poisoning. Flushed and trashed medicines can end up polluting our waterways, and rates of prescription drug abuse are alarmingly high, and over half of teens abusing medicines actually get them from family members or friends, including the home medicine cabinet. If you have questions, you can reach our city staff at 206-275-7755 prior to October 27th. And that's all I have.
Great, thank you very much. So next item of business is appearances. And this is the opportunity for anyone to speak to City Council on any item. As it is election season, however, please be reminded that state law specifically, RCW 4217A555 generally prohibits the use of city facilities for campaign-related purposes with limited exceptions. So accordingly, we do ask that you please do not make campaign-related comments during this time. I know Deb, our city clerk, I believe, has collected the initial sheets for sign-in for public appearances. She'll read the first 3 to 5 names. We ask that you queue up, and we'll go through those people. She'll read the next set, and that way we keep the evening's appearances moving along. So with that, Deb, do you want to go ahead and call our first, or Ally, call our first set of appearances?
Thank you, Mayor Bertlin. Okay, the first 5 people are Gabe Goldberg, Aaron Kiviat, Matt Goldbach, Julie Garwood, and Nathan Farrer.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you. My name is Gabe Goldberg. I live at 7800, and I'm a longtime Mercer Island resident. I've lived here in my 20s, and after living in New York, I returned and have been back for a number of years. And I am personally so excited about the potential of Mercer Island and the opportunities that the light rail brings. And my husband and I are very active in the arts, and in fact, my husband is an artist and would love nothing more than a community art center like MICA, granted the entire community is considered and served. And I certainly appreciate all the work you are doing and the painstaking effort that it takes to manage all the complexities of a community like Mercer Island. But as a resident, I'm concerned about the Tully's and park removal project, because after reviewing the designs, the 5 finalists that you talked about, I and the residents of 7800 have noticed a few things about the plans as they exist. There are hundreds of new residents, which would produce roughly about 350 new cars on a single street, which is currently Sunset Highway. That has really dense implications for a very narrow street with high traffic from not only residential cars, but commercial deliveries that will be happening at all times of the day and all days of the week. And that's going to turn a quiet street and a park that it's enjoyed by the community, kids, high schoolers before parades, dog walkers, home to community events like Art Uncorked, into a very busy thoroughfare on an extremely narrow street. And it's also going to be paving and removing the portion of Aubrey Davis Park that's referred to as the Sculpture Park. And also the designs that we've seen don't adhere to the new design codes for Mercer Island's town center. So we're concerned also that the designs that we've seen are being presented like they're the first step in a long process, but we've actually been advised by our council, Bricklin and Newman, that we only have until November 20th to include inquiries on public record as a part of the procedural process. So on the advice of our council, Dave Bricklin, we request an environmental impact study to review the traffic, lighting, and consequences of developing contaminated land, and also this removal of the part of Aubrey Davis Park so that we understand the implications before any designs move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Aaron Kiviat, and I'm here to talk tonight in support of Amendment 8 to the proposed Mercer Island Comprehensive Plan. I'm a longtime Mercer Island resident, 3rd generation, and I'm an attorney. And I'm here tonight as a board member of Herzl Ner Tamid, which is the synagogue across the street from the Jewish Community Center. I've got just a real brief written statement that we've put together, but I'm here tonight in support of Amendment 8. Mercer Island's existing and future residents will greatly benefit from this amendment and the proactive planning it provides to set parameters around future growth. We like that the comprehensive plan language and rezone work addresses many of the direct concerns brought up by the neighbors, specifically parking, traffic, safety design, scale, and buffers. Herzl Ner Tamid especially appreciates the great work the city staff is doing, the Planning Commission and Council has done thus far, and asks that you please continue to move this amendment forward. So thank you for your support. Just on a personal note, I grew up going to the Jewish Community Center and to Herzl Ner Tamid 43 years ago when I started going there as a baby. It was dated then. Very little has been done to either of those facilities since then, so it's continued to be dated. It's reasonable to allow us to move forward and keep up with the times. The Jewish community when I was a child was somewhere around 35,000 in the greater Seattle area. It's more than doubled since then. We've always been good neighbors and will continue to be so with an open mind and open ear to our neighbors. So we hope that you continue to support this idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Matthew Goldbach, and I live at 9980 Southeast 40th Street. That's essentially the corner of Southeast 40th and East Mercer. I'm here to speak against Comp Plan Amendment 1 and 8. But first, I'd like to point out that I think the city's done a very poor job of involving the community of Mercer Island in the discussion of these amendments. Until last week, there was no city meeting about the potential impacts of these amendments. The J has communicated with their members. The French American School has asked their customers to speak up, as has the Herzl near Tamad. But they all speak to their own self-interest, not to the benefit of these amendments might have on Mercer Island. The first meeting was after the Planning Commission had submitted its opinion to the council. The Planning Commission that could not define a private community facility or community, as they were stating that the proposed amendment was beneficial to Mercer Island community. In fact, after the first reading, the meeting was actually, in fact, after the first reading to the council, and truly 2 years after the J started discussions with the DSG on this topic. At their meeting, they stated, I'm speaking of the J, that they knew they were not in compliance and were asking how to get around the issues of impervious surface and parking. It also should be noted that in 2002 to 2003, the J made a conditional use permit application. It is all the same discussion again. They refer to the same issues today as they were speaking to in 2003. It's the same discussion. How can we increase density? How can we completely ignore the residential code and the residential character of Mercer Island? In 2003, they didn't pretend that they were serving Mercer Island. They clearly stated they serve, and they do, the Jewish community of Greater Seattle. Nor does the French American School assert that primarily they serve Mercer Island. They would not need to expand to serve Mercer Island, then or now. All three applicants expect growth from off-island. We all know that. They also want Mercer Island to pay for it, with municipal services, congested, less safe roads, and loss of residential character. Please do not move these amendments forward. If this passes, I will be one of many aggrieved parties. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Julie Garwood. Our family has lived at 9772 Southeast 41st Street since 1998. Our home overlooks the wooded buffer zone at the southwest corner of the existing JCC property. I am opposed to any final decision on Amendment 8 at this time. The city knows this process has not gone well, that it has not done the outreach necessary to inform residents about this rezoning proposal. The full impact of the applicant's proposed development on our single-family residential neighbourhood has not been assessed. Yes, there was a community meeting on October 11, which some of you attended. It was the first community meeting to discuss Amendment 8. It was also the last community meeting before the City Council is scheduled to vote. Doesn't that seem a little unfair to you? Mercer Island's population is a little over 24,000 residents. I was told that the city sent out just 90 email invitations to that meeting. 90 invitations for 24,000 residents. Despite such a small number, the meeting was well attended, with many residents engaging for the first time. The conversation was lively, the opinions were strong, the concerns were well expressed. Imagine the conversation if the city had sent out 900 invitations. 3 minutes in a public appearance, such as this one here tonight, allows for a statement. A community meeting allows for a discussion. And Mercer Island residents deserved several community meetings before any final vote on Amendment 8. If Amendment 8 is passed, I will continue to fight. I will fight for setbacks no smaller than the existing ones, for no access of 40th Street for construction or future use, for dense vegetation buffer zones that are properly maintained, for existing mature trees to be left in place, for low-rise buildings on the south side of the development, for no security fencing, and above all, for traffic and safety as priority concerns. As was so well expressed in last Thursday's meeting at the community centre, the city needs to find a solution to the current traffic problems on East Mercer Way at the entrance to the J before it allows any new development. If a big problem can't be remedied now, how can a bigger one be remedied later? If this proposed rezone and development is done badly, our family will be injured, our quality of life will be reduced, and the value of our home will surely be impacted. I urge the council to pause and take a closer look at what is at stake for neighbours. Don't just push this through and then tell us that we can have our say. Please understand, we live here, we raise our families here, this is our community, and these are our homes. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. My name's Nathan Farr. I'm a 2-year resident of Mercer Island, and we do send our children to the French American School here, and we're proud parents of our 2 children that attend school there. So I'm here to speak in support of Amendment 8, but mindful of the 2 parties that just came before us and made their objections. The reason that I'm here to support this is to provide some context for why we live on Mercer Island. We relocated here from Chicago 2 years ago. Part of our selection process for living on Mercer Island was the French American School. We had sent our children to the Lycée in Chicago, and my wife and I wanted to replicate that multicultural experience, bilingual experience here in the Seattle area. And had it not been for the French American School, we would not be living here on Mercer Island, I don't believe. And I also come to you, the council, speaking in my experience as a commercial real estate attorney. I am one of those as well. I do deal with permitting, with zoning matters, with complicated issues that confront a variety of constituencies all the time and do have unintended consequences. So with respect to the Amendment 8 and modernizing the comprehensive plan to try and address the facilities that are all involved there, I think from a parent's perspective, from a member of the French American School, from a resident's perspective living on Mercer Island, I think there is a lot at stake, and there's a lot at stake here with respect to addressing the various constituencies and trying to get it right for all the various parties involved, including residents of Mercer Island. With respect to the French American School itself, again, I've been made aware that there are certain constituencies here on Mercer Island that find its presence not very accretive to Mercer Island, really, meaning it's not a public school, right? It's a private institution. But the reason we're here as part of this community, and I think it does draw on a larger base of, a larger population base than is on Mercer Island, it's because of its, again, bilingual approach to education, its multiculturalism, et cetera. So I am in support of Amendment 8 and amending the comprehensive plan on the basis of trying to improve what's here and making it work for all of us that live on Mercer Island. Thank you.
Thank you. Allie?
The next 5 people are Allison Webb Langtree, Carl Bianco, Simone Simone is next, Brad Greenlee, and then Maria Erlitz.
Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Allison Webb Langtree, and I have 2 children who attend the French American School. I also work full-time there as a receptionist. Our family lives in the Lakes here on Mercer Island. We moved here 3 years ago because of the French school. I'm here tonight to support Amendment 8. I agree with the others here tonight that establishing private community facility zoning designation is important, and I think that it supports reasonable growth here on the island. I think Mercer Island's existing and future residents will greatly benefit from that designation. I like how the rezone work hopefully will address many of the concerns brought up by the neighbors, namely parking, traffic, safety, design, scale, and buffers. We, the FAST community, appreciate the great work that everyone has done thus far, and we ask that you please continue to move this amendment forward. Thank you for what you do for our community. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Welcome.
My name is Carl Bianco. I live on North Mercer Way. We've been living North Mercer Way for 37 years. Our children have been graduated from the Mercer Island High School, but that's like 30 years ago or more. I want to speak about the comprehensive plan. It's a difficult position. I'm sure that you as city representatives have found yourself in this position before, and that you have an organization or a developer or somebody who has a specific goal, and you have the neighbors that you have to accommodate. And I realize that that's a challenge for all of you. I guess I want to say that you know, I've lived in this city. I feel it's a progressive city. I'm very proud to be a Mercer Islander, and we have to move forward. I'm aware that at least 2 of the 3 applicants have been on the island before I got here, and I'm aware also, as one speaker said, that the buildings are getting pretty worn out. And I think it's a challenge, but I think it's one that the city has to meet to figure out a way to accommodate and allow our city to move forward and accommodate members of our community, which includes organizations as well as individuals, and at the same time make our city better because of it. So I encourage you to move forward with the comprehensive plan, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Simona Leoy. I've been a resident of Mercer Island for nearly 8 years. I have one child now at the French American School. I had another child that went there and is now at Islander Middle School. We moved here to Mercer Island because of the French school and the other schools and many of the amenities that Mercer Island has to offer. I'm also a member at the JCC, and I would just like to add, someone had mentioned that the JCC was to serve the Jewish community, but I see a lot of people, I myself am not a member of the Jewish community, and I have many friends that also enjoy amendments at the JCC, or not amendments, sorry, I'm a little nervous. Amenities, thank you. And I feel it serves the greater community of Mercer Island. I'm here tonight to support the Amendment 8, and I agree with others that are in support of that. The zoning designations should be added to the city zoning code. Mercer Island's existing and future residents will greatly benefit from this designation. And I think it will address many of the issues that the community has brought up by the neighbors, specifically parking, traffic, safety, design, scale, and buffers. And we appreciate the great work of the city staff and the Planning Commission and all the work that you have done so far for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Brad Greenlee. I am a Mercer Island resident. We live at 8804 Southeast 78th Street on the south end. I have 2 children that attend the French American School. We actually moved here 7 years ago, and Mercer Island was chosen as our place to live largely because of the French American School. And my children also attend summer camps at the JCC, and have for 5 years now. And I'm here tonight to voice my support for the comprehensive plan amendment. The current patchwork of land and zoning is kind of untenable. I coach the cross-country team for the 3rd through 5th graders, and we practice in the little back area that the French American School acquired, and kids are running on gravel roads and terribly maintained fields, and it would be nice to have something in place that allows us to kind of improve those safely. I appreciate that the concerns of the neighbors. We have existing problems that need to be taken care of. Also, traffic getting into the school and the JCC at certain times of the day is terrible and backs up onto East Mercer Way. So I'm hoping that we can put a plan in place that can help resolve these issues and allow all three organizations, JCC, French American School, and Herzl, to kind of grow. So I thank you for your leadership on this issue, and I hope you stay the course and move the amendment forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Maria Ehrlitz, and I'm a resident of Mercer Island for over 40 years, gratefully so, and I have great respect for the City Council and the Planning Commission. I haven't been to many of your meetings, and I certainly don't agree with every decision, but I know that you consider the safety and the development of Mercer Island as your highest goals. I know that. I'm here to support Amendment 8. I work with nonprofits. I am a consultant to nonprofits, and I've worked all over North America to many nonprofits who would die to have 3 organizations come forth to their city and say, we want to work together so that this is beneficial to all of us and not duplicate services and not make 5 different parking areas and all of the above. I think it's so wonderful that the city has the opportunity to grant Amendment 8 and have the organizations work together. I would say, too, as a recently retired consultant, that I now go to the JCC to work out. And if you want to see how multicultural our island has become, go to the JCC, because it's open to everyone and everyone takes advantage of it, and it is a gem. I do have great empathy for the neighbors. I don't think you can live on Mercer Island for 40 years and not have some impact of some development that's going on in your neighborhood. I'm not so happy with the traffic on West Mercer Way either, as they build whatever they're building. I don't even know. I know I have to stop every single day, but I know it's going to benefit me in the end. So I hope that the neighbors that have concern, rightfully so, understand that when there's a community center and 2 other organizations that work together to create beauty on Mercer Island, that it will benefit them as well, that their property values will actually increase, even though I'm sure they will go through a period of some discomfort. So I applaud all that you do. I know how hard it is to work on a city council. It's not my first appearance before city council for other organizations I've worked for. And I know you've done great work so far, and I commend you and hope that you continue to do great work for our wonderful community. I love living here. Thank you.
Thank you. Allie, do we have another list
Meg
of names?
Lippert is our last speaker.
Is there anyone else here for, okay, if you could all line up and we'll just go first come, first serve. Welcome.
Thank you. Meg Lippert, 4052 94th Avenue Southeast. I'm reading an abridged statement by Carves Wingle, who's out of town. It's about our library board. Mayor Bertlin and City Manager Underwood are determined to suppress and ignore citizen input regarding our library. In 1992-1993, Islanders considered whether our library should be annexed into the King County Library System, KCLS, which required a public vote. KCLS guaranteed to support a Mercer Island Library Board that would directly represent the City Council to KCLS. And Mayor Elliott Newman, speaking for the council, promised the appointment of that board to protect island interests. So Islanders voted to join KCLS. But in 1995, 2 years later, the council reneged on their promise and disbanded the library board. In 2014, Mercer Island was faced with closure of the library for over a year so that an unnecessary and unwanted remodel could be accomplished. A citizens group collected thousands of signatures in support of our library and petitioned council to restore a library board to represent the interests of Mercer Island citizens. So council approved a board that was chaired by former Mayor Brian Cairns, and the library was saved. Now, despite opposition from the sitting library board, Mayor Bertland and City Manager Underwood intend to let the board, quote, sunset, end quote, and cease to exist after December 31st, 2018, leaving Mercer Islanders voiceless and powerless regarding our library. This is portrayed as a cost-saving measure. But when Mayor Bertland was presented with examples of 8 other library boards, including Bellevue, that meet twice a year and require no city involvement or expense as minutes are taken by the board and presented to the city council, Mayor Bertland's response was, quote, it doesn't matter, the decision has been made, end quote, but made without citizen input. The cost-saving argument is put to lie by the fact that the city intends to appoint a Parks and Recreation Board that will require city involvement and for which an individual has been hired at an expense of $75,000 per year to coordinate the activities of the new board. And one of the purported responsibilities of the board will be the library. But when Mayor Bertland was asked by the existing board if there would be a board member who would represent the interests of the library, her response was, quote, there will be no constituencies on the board. For instance, we don't want those playfield people. The mayor went on to state that if there were matters involving the library, a citizen could always make an appointment and speak to the Parks and Recreation Director. This begs the question in 2 ways. 1, what does the council and city government see as their role? This example clearly suggests they seek to manage the city exclusive of citizen input, except for those carefully chosen who agree with it. In this case, it is unclear if there is anyone who agrees with it. 2, to what degree is this an exercise of fiscal responsibility? Because a board would cost no additional expense to the city. A community library board benefits Mercer Island residents, city council, and city government, and the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Hi, my name is David Wolborn, and I live at 3940 96th Avenue Southeast, just up the street here. And I am a member of the JCC, obviously, because it's a great organization. And I'm an island neighbor just in Mercerwood, so I know that is. My wife and I came to the island as newlyweds 13 years ago, and drawn to the island by the community lifestyle that's offered here. Our neighborhood experience is the greatest I've ever known. And we actually have pathways built to each other's houses. It's just so we can get there more quickly. As a matter of fact, when we were getting married, actually, when we came here, and neighbors we didn't even know were communicating with our ship captains. It was like crazy welcoming to this island. It's been a great experience. But I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of my wife, who's not here, and a number of my neighbors in support of Amendment 8 to the proposed Mercer Island Comprehensive Plan, updated specifically because it addresses our concerns. As a neighbor close to these properties, I agree with the proposed comp plan language that safety is our paramount importance and should be a priority during all phases of the project development, and that regulations should be established to address appropriate mitigation and transportation and parking matters, and providing adequate access while striving to reduce conflicts and congestion. I know these are concerns for some of my neighbors for differing reasons, yet I believe we share mostly common ground on which to work together in addressing them. Thank you, Planning Commission, the Council, City staff, for your hard work on Amendment 8 in addressing these concerns, and I encourage the Council to move this forward, this Amendment 8 forward. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. I'm an opposition of Amendment 1 and 8, representing the Mercerwood neighborhood.
I believe we just need your name.
My name is John Hall. I live in the Mercerwood neighborhood for 60 years. I reside at 9970 Southeast 40th Street. I have a vacant lot at 9902 Southeast 40th Street. I'm very disappointed that DSG would not have given the Planning Commission and the City Council the 50 years of historic records of unkept promises and systematic abuses by the applicants. I don't see how the City Council could make an educated recommendation without taking into account the historic public record and current public record of what's happened in the neighborhood. Ed Weinstein, representing the applicant, has tried to encroach past their existing buffers zones in the neighborhood many times. I believe this is the 4th or 5th time. The last denial of the conditional use permit was 1985. And again in 2002, when the variance conditions such as impervious surface allowance and other restrictions in the neighborhood revolved, he rescinded the application. In 2003, the JCC street variation was approved, but could not be used for higher density, stated of record by P.S. Sheeta from the city of Mercer Island. Excuse me. This property was designed and built for 1,000 JCC family members. Per Amy, the JCC membership is now 2,500 family memberships, which has 130 existing parking spaces. And now let's add the French school into the equation. This is 7,500 people at a minimum today, not counting the future expansion of 60%. Today's conditions have cars parking all over our neighborhood. The math does not work. In 2016, Ed Weinstein is asking Scott Greenberg how we can work past all these codes and restrictions, and they concocted the private community zone to be able to manipulate the system. Those codes and restrictions were developed to protect our residential neighborhoods. The applicant's facility is the largest and most intrusive commercial business on Mercer Island, and the activity runs from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. 7 days a week. The DSG, Evan, and Nicole, who have only been on the island 2 years, have created a narrative that this zoning change is good for all Mercer Island neighborhoods. We have established buffer zones, greenbelt in perpetuity. We had evergreen tree screening until Amy cut them down against policy. We were to have no access from 40th Street, which again is being violated by the applicants.
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to finish up, please.
The neighbors have asked repeatedly to please show us the criteria of the new zone. They have not answered one single condition. All logic and reason has been thrown out the window for this request, and the applicants have total disregard for the neighborhood, as by not honoring or respecting any and all existing conditions. This is also very selfish to oppose a zoning change which impacts all of Mercer Island neighborhoods.
Could you please wrap up? Thank you.
Okay.
Next, and welcome.
Hello, my name is Kate Swenson. I am not a resident of Mercer Island, but I spend a lot of time here. I wanted to stop by and introduce myself. I am one of the 2 new co-executive directors of Youth Theater Northwest, along with Mimi Catano, who is real. She's just not here tonight. And Mimi and I are not new to YTN. We have something like 30 years combined at YTN. And in the past 5 years, while Manny Qualling, you know him, you gave him a whole day to himself. We're very impressed. He did the incredible work of trying to find YTN a new permanent home. Well, Mimi and I were in the trenches, reinventing our theater programming to fit inside a church. Sure, we've done a pretty good job. This kind of challenge takes creative minds, and we have those. We've spun straw into gold, turned problems into opportunities. We've put rouge on the pig. Emmanuel Church and their tenants have graciously welcomed us, as have the JCC, Mercer Island United Methodist Church, Newcastle, Seattle, many locations to contain one YTN. They are our heroes, and we really appreciate them. And we know the truth about ourselves. We are on our best behavior, but we are 700 kids worth of large and messy. We're not easy, but it works for now. The space we use for our productions is a cement-floored hall made out of windows. We added the walls, the risers, the chairs, the magical, innovative sets. We can have dramatic blackouts as long as it's not a matinee. Our backstage is a kitchen, which is about the size of your desk. And when it's time for the French toast feed, and everyone wants a French toast feed, I'm on board, then we have to take down the walls, the risers, the chairs, and the magical, innovative sets so we can share. It's not easy, but it works for now. For our summer camps, we push the contents of the preschool rooms against one wall and cover them with sheets. And in the other half of the room, the kids learn and create their own theater magic, build confidence, make friends, have fun. And when their parents and grandparents come to see the final performance, they get to make friends too, because they are packed in, cheek to jowl, and there isn't room for chairs. It's not easy, but it works for now. For now has lasted a long time for us. The creative minds and body of YTN are kind of tired of making it work. Mimi and I are tired, and Mimi's really old. She's not here, so I can say that. I'm not sure how much more we've got left in us. We've lost Manny and Jesse, and Micah, our light at the end of the tunnel, has been moving further and further away from our view. But the light is back, and just like the Deus Ex Machina that swoops in at the end and saves the day at the end of the play, you guys have a chance to swoop in and save the day for YTN. Choose a proposal for the Tully site that includes a viable space for Micah. It's what the people of Mercer Island want, and it's what YTN needs, a new hero. And we're holding out for our heroes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, if there's anybody else, if you'd please go ahead and line up.
I promise not to be as colorful as the last presenter. My name is Ryan Relfs. I live at 9703 Southeast 40th Street. The council well understands my position on Comprehensive Amendment 8, so I won't repeat it. I'd first like to thank the council for communicating to the public your position on CPA 8 in the last council meeting. It really helps us to better engage with the issue now. I'm glad that the city, members of the Planning Commission, members of the council, the neighborhoods, the applicants, and even many speakers tonight are all in agreement about at least one thing in this very contentious time, which is one of the purposes, or at least one of the effects, of the Comprehensive Amendment Plan 8 is to address the concerns and needs of residents living in this area of the island. And I believe I've even heard 3 times that even speakers tonight and members of these institutions were aware of the concerns of the neighbors, including, I heard this 3 times, parking, traffic, safety, scale, design, and buffers. So it seems even the speakers tonight wish that resolving these concerns is within their needs and desires as well. I'm here to ask for 2 requests. I hope that the council will deliberate today and will signal to the city how they want to ensure that these hopes of the public will be incorporated into the final outcome of this zone. If you could possibly comment on what you liked about the community meeting and what you hope to see more of. I believe I saw 3 of you there. The second, Councilmember Wong, I came in at the end of the last meeting and I heard you talking or deliberating about the difference between shall and should, and I forget what the issue was on. And I've been told by other members of the council that you are particularly focused on details and that you're very skillful in parsing out what different words mean and why they mean that way. Last meeting, the deputy mayor actually added in public to the safety element of the amendment, which was, I can't believe that had not appeared to anybody prior to now. So I ask for sort of the same consideration today. Please consider the comments that everyone has said, and they're asking for as strong of an amendment as possible to protect the interests of the neighbors. And if in reading the amendment you see an opportunity to strengthen an amendment, please do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Ira Appleman, 9039 East Shorewood. The budget kicked off today, and I have some questions that I'd like to get answers to. Number 1, the city doesn't track staff time, even though it's the biggest expense of the city, and I don't understand how that can be justified. I've made 3 record requests asking for time, the city staff, and the answer is always they don't have that. They don't track city time. The only city time that is staff time that's tracked is how long it takes to do the record request. And I know you resent having to do those record requests, but the record request actually says how much time staff spent. Number 2, the city is paying the city manager, and I've said this a number of times, the city is paying the city manager more than the mayor of Seattle is paid. So the city manager is paid based on an agenda bill early this year, $195,000 plus $8,000 bonus, so that's $203,000, of course, plus benefits. The Seattle mayor is paid around $200,000, and you can look on their website. She makes $96.05 an hour, and you multiply in Seattle by 2,088 to get yearly salary. So it seems to me that this is the only member of Mercer Island that you set their salary directly. And it seems to me like you're a big spender based on comparable cities that I've found, like SeaTac and Maple Valley. The city manager should be making around $175,000 plus benefit. So I'd like you in the budget process to tell me why this salary is so far out of whack. The Seattle is 25 times the size of Mercer Island. 3, previous councils have said that reducing budgets by 5 to 10%. I remember Mike Grady, when he was a council member, saying that that's common and you have to be able to do that. And this council doesn't do that. And this is a new thing that the council, because I think you're big spenders, you're not willing to reduce budgets in the way that everybody else has to do it. 4th, you use the utility tax as a contingency fund, that is utility tax on water and things that Mercer Island provides. And I think that should be provided for in the budget. Those are my budget comments. I am against the community facilities zone. I think it's going to greatly damage the neighborhood, the JCC neighborhood. It has nothing to do with planning and helping the neighborhood. It's about intensifying the activity on that land. And the real danger is that this zoning, most islanders don't even know, this zoning is a new zone that could happen right next to them. And I think that's a huge danger and one of the most dangerous things this city council has done in recent years. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else for public appearances? Okay, seeing none, public appearances is closed. So council, the next item of business is the consent calendar, which includes payables, payroll, minutes, AB 5486. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
It's been approved, motion to approve and second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, consent calendar approved. We now move on to regular business, and the first item is AB 5490, the 2018 Comprehensive Plan amendments and the accompanying zoning amendments, second reading. So welcome, Evan Maxim.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I'm Evan Maxim, your Interim Development Services Director. You went through a fairly extensive review of the proposed comprehensive plan amendments on October 2nd. I'm not going to go back through all of the amendments tonight unless there are specific questions from the council. I did think I'd touch briefly on the October 11th community meeting that was alluded to in public comment tonight. I'm aware of a handful of council revisions that are substantive in nature that I would put onto the screen for council consideration. The non-substantive amendments, clarifications, typographical errors, things of that nature, we've taken care of in the background already. And then I do have a motion for you to consider at the end of the conversation tonight. So we did have our community meeting on October 11th. I apologize, I did not think to take a picture of the actual room. We had more than 40 people in the room at the community center. This was a targeted outreach, so you heard comment earlier tonight around the number of people notified by email. We specifically reached out to those who had commented during the comprehensive plan amendment discussion, against the proposed amendment. So those folks that we knew were in the Mercerwood neighborhood or along East Mercer who were skeptical or not supportive of the amendment, we were trying to target that group and have them in the room. In the specific question, we essentially had two items we were trying to talk through with that community group on Thursday. The first was a review of the roadmap of what our code amendment process would look like, presuming the City Council decides to move forward with this policy direction on November 20th. I will touch on that roadmap a little bit further in just a moment. The second was to gather ideas around either specific policy expansion that was necessary in your comprehensive plan amendment package for this evening, or to identify further detail around specific code amendments that we need to address as part of our code amendment writing exercise, presumably starting in December. We had about 13 pages of the flip chart. I've taken a picture of one of them and popped it on the screen just for reference. These were very much around the themes that you've heard tonight. You can see on the screen that one of those themes that's not really a regulation I can write, but is an underlying comment, is around trust. It was a fairly lively meeting. I think I heard it described earlier today. It went on for about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, with kind of final comments at the end. It is the first in a series of community meetings, and I'm going to shift on to the schedule, presuming again the City Council decides to move forward with this exercise on November 20th. This is the calendar that I put up in the meeting on October 11th. With one correction. I had missed one of my bullets along the timeline, and I've now added that in. So we'd start with our second community meeting on December 13th. This would be to refine the scope even further on the draft code amendment. A number of the people who even spoke tonight or in the community have asked, what are the current regulations? What could we look at as part of the revised regulation? That is a large part of the focus of the conversation on December 13th, scope setting. And it informs our first draft, which we're aiming to produce by January 23rd. January 24th, as you'll see on the calendar tonight, is an opportunity to have a third community meeting. And the idea here is that we will take the list of things we've heard from the community, we'll look at the code and see where those items that have been identified by the community are either addressed by the code or not. And there are some things in that list already which are probably not fair game from a zoning standpoint. For example, requiring beach access down to the lake edge is probably not something I can require as a zoning code requirement. There might be ways that we could talk with the organizations about creating incentives, and we'll explore that with those organizations. That exercise on January 24th, though, is intended to allow for a very informed community to comment to the Planning Commission on January 30th, which will be the Planning Commission's first opportunity to dig into that first draft of the regulations. The item I missed on Thursday was the February 13th production of our second draft, which will be reviewed by Planning Commission on February 20th. And the ultimate result of that February 20th meeting will be a public hearing draft, which will be generated on March 1st. This sets us up for an April 3rd public hearing before the Planning Commission, before they make their recommendation to you, presumably either at April 3rd or on April 17th, and then the City Council review would occur after that. So that's our timeline looking forward. I'm going to shift gears, if I may, to the 4 or 5 amendments that I'm aware the Council would like to discuss this evening, and I'm happy to field questions at the end if that works for you, Mayor. Before I jump into that, I do have a slightly, Exhibit 4 to your packet was the cover letter proposed by the Arts Council for the Arts and Culture Plan, which is incorporated as Appendix D to your amendments. I have a slightly updated version of that letter, which I'd like to hand to the Council and then enter into the record with the clerk.
Thank you.
So I believe there are two amendments that were identified for discussion in your agenda bill for this evening. The first was adding this cover letter to Appendix D. I've just provided you with a copy. The cover letter is essentially a very gracious thank you from the Arts Council. I'm paraphrasing heavily. And the second was an evaluation of proposed policy 24.4, which is one of the policies contained within the Arts and Culture Amendment, Amendment number 6. If you're looking for that, I will provide you the page number in just one moment. And the page number for this would be page 61 of your packet. Oh, pardon me, it's on page 62. And this would be revised language. So the language you have in the packet is the language I showed you on October 2nd. And the revised language is the italicized text in the center of the screen in front of you. I'm happy to speak to this amendment further if need be, describing the change.
Council, any questions regarding this particular change? Benson?
Well, Evan, were you going to explain, I guess the question basic questions would be, why is this revision being proposed in the first place?
I believe the Arts Council, after your first review, took another look at some of the wordsmithing that occurred on October 2nd and identified this was one of the policies that was modified slightly on October 2nd, and felt that the scope of 24.4 was not quite right in their mind, and they suggested that the City Council consider this as an alternative.
So it's a suggestion coming from the Arts Council, subsequent to our conversation 2 weeks ago.
It is, and it does change both the scope of the geographic area that policy 24.4 affects, which is narrowing it from Mercer Island wide to town center, and it changes the scope of the policy direction, if you will, from just public to be both public and private.
Can you, I'm going to go ahead and ask a question then. Can you clarify or provide context as to why the emphasis on town center, which also then includes sort of reducing the expectation that it would happen for capital projects that are not in the town center? So let's say there's a capital project that is at a park that is not in our town center. What would be the impact? What would be the delta between what is in our comp plan today and with this amendment?
That's a good question, Mayor. The delta here is really a shift in focus of the recommendation. So again, I can't give you a super precise answer because this is really a shift in the policy direction. It may not shift actual public art presentation on the ground. But the original focus of 24.4 was to make an effort to include public art in capital improvement projects. And this is really kind of shifting that to be more town center specific.
So I can speak to it a little bit because I'm the liaison with the Arts Council. I think what this is not so much trying to understand a delta of what it said before and what it said now, but a greater understanding by the Arts Council of the 1% for the arts and how that might relate to town center arts. Part of the historical trend has been for town center development to purchase public art, especially from Greta Hackett, for display in town center development. So this is really kind of encouraging a continuation of that rather than what was basically a misperception of the 1% for the arts. So I think it would be wrong to try and compare the old language to the new language here. I would just look at this language and say if this is not objectionable, that the Arts Council is simply trying to encourage the continuation of that trend of incorporating art into town center development.
Benson?
You know, when I read it, I guess I realized these are policies, arguably aspirational. But as I read it, I was wondering whether or not it would be viewed as a mandate of some sort. And if the answer is no, then the question I would have is, well, how will the DSG and the Design Commission, when they see this particular policy, do you end up actually mandating that there be incorporation of public art? And I guess I'm really more concerned really for private developers as opposed to, you know, that's an option that they have to incorporate public art, but does this sort of take away that option?
So after the comprehensive plan amendment, a long-winded answer if I may, Councilmember. After the comprehensive plan amendments are adopted in November, part of our next task is to prepare a work plan for implementation of those policies, some of which are intentionally supporting programs or regulations we already have in place, and some of which expand upon that policy direction and will give us a new work plan, if you will. Here, I would anticipate that to some extent, this is not a mandate. It is supporting some of our town center regulations already, which do allow for the installation of public art. The question is, are they encouraging that installation? If they're not, likely what I would end up doing is approaching the city council and suggesting code amendments that would encourage that public art, or partnering with our arts council in looking for other ways to promote public art within town center. So I need to have some follow-up action here to pursue it. It's not something that we would normally look at when we're engaged in project review, unless it's either in code or we're in an area where there's an absence of regulatory direction. So I would not expect this to be something that the Design Commission would refer to in their review, or that the staff would refer to in their development review until we took those follow-up actions.
So just some initial thoughts on this. The extent to which it's, it focuses really on the town center leads me to hope and or want to address the fact that it wouldn't be at the exclusion of the rest of the island. The example that I give is one of the pieces of art that draws one of my personally most emotive responses is at the South End Fire Station. And I drive by that and I see, the remains of Twin Towers outside our fire department, and it's powerful to me. I want to make sure that we don't lose that we don't lose a sense of encouragement, if not even responsibility, to include public art, not only in our town center, but in all our public facilities, and to the extent possible, encourage it in the private development, as I think Benson has, smartly raised. So right now, I'm struggling with the wording because it seems to be somewhat exclusionary. Yeah.
Mayor, may I suggest that the best way in my mind to review these policies is in the context of the goal statement right above them, which is on that page 62, pardon me. It's goal statement 24, which is to nurture public art on Mercer Island. So this is a subset, if you will, of that goal statement. So to me, you have a goal that would speak to the whole island, and then a more specific direction targeted at town center.
Benson?
So is the proposal to delete the existing 24.4, or can you just add this? I mean, they're really addressing two different things. I mean, one is capital improvements and has a broader geographic scope, and this revision is obviously narrowed down to town center. So it's not as if they're mutually exclusive. We can actually decide to actually include both.
You certainly could include both, Councilmember. I understood the proposal to be to replace the existing 24.4.
So do we, Deputy Mayor, is there a reason? I'm just wondering whether or not there was thoughts of in the discussion of just deleting the existing 24.4, or why not keep it in there?
I don't know. Since we have the vice chair of the Arts Council here, if you want to speak to this, I don't want to put you on the spot at all.
Maybe I can clarify a little bit.
Great. Yeah, if you could just then please introduce yourself when you come to the microphone. Thank you.
I am Erin Vivian. I'm the vice chair of the Arts Council. So to speak to your hesitation, is I want you to remind you that 24.2 speaks to including art in public spaces all over the island. 24.4 was never really meant to include a mandate to include art in every capital improvement project. The wording was off. And the intent of it was basically to capture what's already in Chapter 19 of Code, which is the Town Center Development Code, which already does encourage the incorporation of art into features of Town Center. There are certain requirements, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but how I read it was there are certain requirements in the code that say that there have to be a certain amount of site features, and one of them is art that developers can choose. So it's specifically meant to address that particular code and capture that in the policies.
And,
if that's
and I'll
helpful.
just add that the conversation that we had at the Arts Council around the 1% for the arts, which is a funding mechanism for arts out of capital projects, the timing and opportunity of the arts doesn't always coincide with the installation of the capital project, just as you saw on the West Mercer Way off-ramp. And so we didn't want to get in the way of capital projects getting done and on schedule by having some requirement in there. We knew that the funding was there and that could be used to then go back and put the art in a capital facility. So, yeah.
So is this then intended to remove the expectation of art in the capital project?
No, and I think you'll see dotted around the comp plan that is there. I mean, make an effort to include public art into surrounding transportation projects. You know, that's clearly a capital facility. Just the overarching nurturing public on Mercer Island. I think this is just a bit of a misunderstanding and then restatement of what the intention was.
Right now, I'm sort of leaning toward what I took away as Benson's thought, that this would be a statement in addition to rather than instead of 24.4, simply because I worry that the more I'm hearing, the more elements I'm understanding are addressed in terms of the concept of it, including it in capital development, the intent to encourage it, particularly in the town center, yet potentially with the impact that it is perceived to be less a priority outside of town center, et cetera. So I'm open to being swayed or convinced otherwise, but right now, I would suggest it be in addition to rather than instead of 24.4.
So Evan, what's the implication of adding to these? Is it going to add more codes and requirements and administration?
So especially in light of the co-chair's comments a moment ago, I understand this policy to essentially support our current town center regulations. The 24.4, the current policy that's in your packet tonight, I think is intended to speak to the 1% for capital projects you're already engaged in. So I think we're a little bit overthinking the discussion at the moment, and I mean that with due respect to council. These are directional statements. What I'm obligated to do is look at whether or not we are taking steps towards implementing that direction. And again, especially given the comments from the co-chair a moment ago from Arts Council, I think I certainly understand the proposed language now.
So council, I mean, the point is we can continue to focus on this, or, I mean, we do have the opportunity in terms of how we approach this whole list to come back to this if people want a little bit of time to think and consider. Benson, you want to make some additional comments?
I think we can certainly perhaps see where we are on this particular proposed revision. I think the fact that it's not viewed as any kind of a mandate helps me appreciate it more, and I can certainly understand the reasoning for it, and so I would be in favor of that revision. Now, the second question is whether or not you keep the existing 24.4. That's a different question, I guess. So, you know, instead
They
of...
suggested it, so.
No, yeah, I know. Yes, I did suggest it, but, you know, perhaps we can just take one at a time and, as opposed to waiting. I think we've sort of talked this one around.
Well, no, I'm comfortable either way. Okay, so it's going to be interesting because we have 4 people here. We have an even number, which could result in two thumbs ups, because we don't formally vote at this point on the amendments per se. Benson, what is your current direction? And then
Yeah, my current direction would be to accept the proposed 24.4. You know, I guess I don't quite understand, because as I read the current 24.4, again, it talks in terms of aspirational goals with respect to public art. It doesn't talk about timing as far as when you have to do it. It simply talks in terms of encouraging or making an effort to include public art in these capital improvement projects. So it's not, I don't see it. Maybe it was interpreted as a timing
Well, I think if it was what you are alluding to,
Yeah.
it might say capital facilities, because that would be a completed capital improvement project. The Arts Council was trying to be cognizant of not inserting itself into
the actual
projects. Right? That these art installations could easily be done after projects are completed, but not get into the actual construction of the project, because of timing.
Well, maybe changing just the capital facilities or completed projects or completed capital improvement projects.
Salim, can you clarify your understanding of whether it would make more sense to add this or replace that?
I would honestly take the amendment and remove the 24.4 at the guidance of the Arts Council. This was a misunderstanding, and this is a correction of the misunderstanding that goes to the intent of what was discussed through the community engagement process, discussed at the Arts Council, discussed in the previous drafts. I believe that the new 24.4 could stand alone, and it'll be just fine.
Okay, so can I ask for clarification? Because then the 2 variables I'm hearing now are timing, means so that art can be installed after the capital project itself. So you used, for example, the West Mercer mural as an example. And then the second one is location, that there's an emphasis that the Arts Council would like to express with regard to the town center. Are those the
Because
2
it's supported
pieces?
by implementing code, right? There's already Title 19 code to support
Okay.
town, and that was the intent, this was a lot of housekeeping to clean up the comp plan, have a comp plan element that supported the code to begin with.
I'm comfortable with that. I mean, the extent to which there comes a point within the comp plan that we can wordsmith to the nth degree. I guess what I would hope then, and I'm gonna have to be honest, it's a hope without having an actual change to the comp plan itself, is that town center does not become to the exclusion of other locations. That is really the fundamental point of concern that I had, again, using the South End Fire Station as an example. So if that, I'm gonna actually look at Evan as the person who's then going to be the implementer of all this. If you say, yeah, that's good.
I think that's clear in your draft
Okay.
draft materials.
Okay, then I'm good, Wendy's good,
Yeah, well, I'm
Benson?
going to be probably good, but if, I
Probably.
mean, you know, I'm already good with the new version. But as far as going beyond the town center, the way you're also reading 24.2 to,
I actually read 24.2 and 24.5 at getting at some of the concern you're speaking to right now. So I think the former 24.4 language, if I may, was kind of extra, and I think I understand the council direction.
Okay.
So council, I'm hearing that we are comfortable right now with that recommended revision.
Yes.
Encourage the incorporation of public art into town center development, design, and site features.
Yes.
Okay, thumbs up. Cool.
and pardon me, Mayor, I didn't see all 4 thumbs. Is that, okay, pardon me, I just looked down. May I ask, Mayor, do you mind the question about the cover letter incorporated into Appendix D?
Not at all. I think if we're ready to move back to that one. So I don't know, council, is there a sense that this needs to be spoken to, or with the Arts Council, or Deputy Mayor Neese, do you want to speak to it?
Well, I think this was just the final thought in what was many months of work by many people, and recognition by the Arts Council of those that contributed, and the process and the community. And I think we felt especially strong that as an Arts Council, that if we didn't do something as nice as write a letter, it would seem artsy. So
Okay,
here we are.
being artsy. Wendy Benson, any comments, concern? Okay, I think I'm not quite sure what we're thumbs upping, but I think we're thumbs upping that it's a good letter.
Acknowledging the letter and putting it
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Great.
And so the only thing that I'll say that will change is the logo is probably going to be corrected to the Arts Council logo in some
Okay.
form. That's it.
Thank you. All right, Evan, back to you, or are we now on other with the question mark, which hands it back to us?
On the pardon me, I've got capital facilities on the brain now. On the community facilities amendment number 8, I am aware of a few edits that at least one of the council members tonight wanted to recommend. I'm happy to call those out, but they are on page 65 of your agenda, Bill.
Okay.
And these were items that were identified by Councilmember Wong earlier in your earlier email this morning.
So before we sort of launch into them in any degree of depth, my understanding is these were recommendations that came from Benson. The two of you have had the opportunity to discuss them. What I took away was that they were largely
He's okay.
cleanups in wording, and you guys were both comfortable with those recommended changes.
Well, some of it was cleanup and some of it was,
Some of it was a little bit more substantive.
More substance.
Yeah.
Okay. So then I'll leave it up to you, Benson and Evan, to determine. I think we're going to then need to go through each one of them.
there aren't that many.
I believe there are only 2 that I'm aware of, Councilmember. Would you like me to describe them, or would
Sure.
you prefer to? The first was related to Goal 27 on, again, page 65 of your agenda, Bill. And what we have right now is a goal that reads, establish a zoning designation that would enable the location of community facilities that shall utilize master planning techniques and accommodate flexible design standards to encourage superior site design and building design outcomes. And I believe the proposal was to insert the words where appropriate after the words master planning techniques. So you'd have a comma, where appropriate, comma, and accommodate flexible design. Did I capture that correctly, Councilmember?
That's correct, and I guess the context is simply, I asked Evan, since, again, it used shall utilize master planning techniques, excuse me, what triggers that application or that requirement? And Evan, you can certainly weigh in or explain that.
Yeah, and I think this came up in a couple of different contexts, even in our community meeting on last Thursday night. When we're thinking of master planning, this typically makes sense on sites that are relatively large and you have either multi-phases or a somewhat complex site design. So you could envision that we might have a property that was, say, a 1/4 acre and also happened to be zoned community facilities at some later date. In that kind of context, it may not make sense to look at a master plan approach. And so this softens the language a little bit. The actual threshold for requiring the master plan would typically be identified in your code. So the comp plan would describe the policy direction. Our intent is to use master planning where appropriate. The code would then define that threshold for what appropriateness meant in terms of a regulation. Does this make sense, Council? Do you have any questions, please?
Councilor, are there any questions? So in essence, we're adding, where appropriate, following the reference to master planning techniques and the threshold for that master planning
Would be
exist
described in your code, yes.
Okay. All right, so council, I'm not, thumbs up? Thumbs up, okay?
Thank you. May I speak to the second item, Councilmember? Mayor? The second item was a suggested amendment to policy 27.3, which currently reads, "Public safety is of paramount importance and shall be a priority during all phases of project development, including planning, project design, and the entitlement process." I believe the proposal was to strike the word "and" before the word "entitlement," add a comma after "entitlement process," and add the words "and construction." And context on this, I believe this actually came out of some of the community discussion last Thursday, where there was a concern raised that there might be safety impacts resulting from, I think the specific example was construction equipment parking on the public roads or nearby, staging, things of that nature. So this would clarify that it includes public safety as a concern even during construction.
Okay. It was a well-articulated concern at the meeting. Council, any concerns, comments?
Evan, I'm sorry. Can you read the new language, just front to back?
Yes, Council. Pardon me, Deputy Mayor. Public safety is of paramount importance and shall be a priority during all phases of project development, including planning, project design, the entitlement process, and construction.
Thank you.
Council, any need for comment, question? You ready for a thumbs up? Thumbs up? Okay, you get 4.
And I thought maybe this might be the appropriate time to ask this question, but it goes back to your description of the process regarding Comp Plan 8, excuse me, as far as engaging the public in further public meetings and what have you. So the question, I mean, during this public meeting on October 11, one takeaway I had was, regardless of where you stood, pro or con, or relative to Comp Plan 8, a lot of the concerns raised were pretty uniform. I mean, again, we've heard it tonight, traffic, safety issues, pedestrian safety, parking, whatever. So I just want to make sure that, I mean, I know you've captured those comments, and I guess I'm just trying to figure out, when you hold your next public meeting, your second community meeting on the 13th of December, presumably those concerns are going to be raised again. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, if a community person raises them, how are they going to be captured by the staff? I mean, do you guys sift through that again, or do you address all the issues that are raised by the community? Again, seems relatively finite number of concerns. It's just kind of a process question that I have.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking, Councilmember. So my intent, the concerns, the flip chart, the picture I showed you a few slides ago, those are actually posted on the city's Let's Talk website right now. So you could go view what we saw or what we heard on October 11th. We are starting to track public comment around the rezone, getting a little bit over our skis with council, assuming that you are going to give us the direction to move forward on November 20th, but we want to get the public comment captured. And my intent here is to, on January 24th, so after that first draft of the code is released, have a list of the public comments, not exactly verbatim, but trying to touch on the various aspects of development regulation that are desired, identify those in a list format, and identify where they're addressed in the regulation. Some of those, you'll see a response back. One of those items was trust. I've been scratching my head trying to think of how I can actually address trust in a meaningful way through the zoning regulation process, because it was a comment brought up in that context. There may be nothing that I can write. So far I haven't thought of anything, and I haven't really put this question to the applicant around how we build trust specifically into a zoning regulation. But that should be clearly documented, so a member of the public who raised that as a concern can then say, Planning Commission, you failed to address this issue, and this is what I think you should do. Or you failed to address this issue, and I understand why. or in fact, you did address this issue, but you got it wrong or you got it right. So it's intended to allow for very on-point comments where people can see their concerns as addressed in the code or not. A lot of this is trying to set expectations for everybody, all of the parties, around what this development review, again, presuming it moves forward, will look like.
Wendy?
All right, so 27.8, if we qualify goal 27 with where appropriate for master planning techniques, and then down in 27.8, we say master planning process shall be utilized. Are those in conflict with each other?
The 27.8 reads, shall be utilized for all major development of community. And to me, this is it's appropriate for what I would characterize as major development, which is development over a certain size, scale, complexity, or phasing.
So major qualifies that as appropriate.
That's how I read it, yes, Councilmember.
So are we all clear on that?
Well, I think the regulating code would clarify major development, right? That would come later.
Yeah.
Just as we talked.
Yeah. And it will be a default of that threshold I tried to describe earlier of might be a certain size, a certain complexity in design would be the quote-unquote major development here. The specific term may not actually appear in the code.
Okay, and then maybe in the second sentence, can we add some component of public outreach or public engagement? The way we say facilities should be subject to a community design dialogue, utilizing techniques such as a design charrette. Can we add something about public engagement and public outreach so we do more than 90 emails to folks who've already expressed interest and make sure we get enough awareness about this as it's coming together, especially given the tight timeline and the time of year that it's happening, so that we can be really clear about being inclusive,
Yes, of course, yeah.
if council agrees?
Yeah, I don't have a problem per se. My question is, one of the bigger questions is the extent to which for any of these, when an applicant applies to change their zone, does that trigger a specific set of processes within the city with regard to some form of public outreach?
It does now, and more clearly after those procedural code amendments were adopted a little over 3 or 4 weeks ago. So recall we had some process that was alluded to, but at least in my read of it was not a clearly laid out, this is how a rezone moves through the legislative process. So maybe to refine Councilmember Weiker's comment a moment ago, the intent of this slide is to try and describe our public outreach around the drafting of the zoning regulations. I understood Councilmember Weiker's comment to actually be around the next step after the zoning regulations, which would be for the master planning and kind of project review stage. Our current processes, you may recall, there are essentially 4 categories, one of which went to design commission and had kind of a notice of public hearing and things of that nature. My presumption, not having gotten into the actual code drafting yet, is that we were looking at something like that process plus the design shreds.
And my intent here is if we put it in our aspirational documents, we'll execute it as we get to the development regulations for this project or any others that come forward over the.
Thank you for clarifying.
So Wendy, can you read that out loud, what you would want to have 27.8 read, I think particularly the second sentence?
So I think in the second sentence, something like facilities should be subject to a community design dialogue utilizing techniques such as a design charrettes and public engagement or public outreach, whichever word Evan prefers.
How about public engagement and outreach?
Okay. Council, any discussion? You see none thumbs up? Okay, great. So Salim, you had one?
Yeah, 27.5, housing uses shall be limited and relate to the mission of and be accessory to the primary facility. My concern there is that most of these organizations have mission statements, and I don't think that this is speaking to the mission statement of the organization as opposed to the operations of the facility. So I would ask that mission be changed to operations, so it would read, housing shall be limited and relate to the operations of and be accessory to the primary facility. Unless I'm off point there and the mission statement of the particular organization is what we're really trying to refer to.
Can I ask a question of clarification? And this is a made-up example, so make believe. So let's say, for example, that the French American School, and the Temple decide that they would like to pursue the equivalent of rector's housing on the site. I understand how putting some form of equivalent there would be consistent with mission and operations. However, I'm also thinking that what if they wanted to host a visiting scholar of some sort? And I don't know that that visiting scholar would align per se with the operations of that organization, and therefore that academic could not then be housed in that residential unit.
Yeah, I get it, and here's my thought. The applicant, any applicant doing this is taking conceivably a residential zoning and trying to convert it to a community facility. If they want to do that, leave it residential, right? Let it be a house and use it as a house. I think that the intent of this is not what you're talking about.
That's part of my question, I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe you can speak to the intent of the word mission, if it is about the organization's, the applicant's mission versus executing the mission of running a community center.
So the Planning Commission's discussion around this was almost exactly around the two examples you were using a moment ago, around essentially the rectory or the parsonage on a site, or I think the example for the French American School was boarding on the property. And so I understand the replacement of mission with operations. It's probably a little bit more clear from a staff perspective, if you will. I think the actual test you're describing should come out of the regulations, not out of the policy direction tonight. So what I read this policy as big picture is that single-family subdivision is not appropriate in community facilities zone, but that some limited housing would be appropriate, and we need to define when. And now with this policy direction, it needs to be related to the operations of the facilities. So to me, that's the policy direction that we would then have our next conversation around development regulations on.
Benson?
Sorry, I'm probably just being dense here. So Evan, when you explain that, I get it as far as the developing the code, that'll be a lot more specific. But are you saying that the word mission, are you saying that you would rather keep the word mission in there as opposed to?
No, I was actually suggesting operations is a bit more
I heard you say
precise.
operations, but I mean, I guess.
I apologize. I get long-winded and maybe run on sentence there. So mission could be read by different people to mean different things. I think that was the deputy mayor's point. Operations is pretty clearly tied to the operation of the community facilities. So to me, that is a better term in terms of direction to staff.
Can you explain how the Planning Commission got to mission instead of operations?
I think they were probably a little less rigorous, if you will, in the evaluation of that specific term. I don't think they focused on mission, the term mission. I think they were focusing really on whether to allow housing at all, and then to what extent.
At this point, I think I'm still more comfortable with mission. And the reason that is because of the very point that you just raised, and that is the specifics around it would be addressed in the actual code itself. This wouldn't impact, meaning how many you could have or how big they could be, but I would want to leave dialogue available for the community and for the applicants to make sure to help understand exactly what that means, because operations, at least to me, has a very functional approach. Does that mean that the groundskeeper would be living there because they're part of the operations, yet not a scholar of some sort? And I don't know that I would be ready at this point to opt out certain uses of that housing at this point. I think that would be a very important piece of the dialogue to have going forward. So at this point, I'm supporting maintaining mission.
Yeah, I'd just speak to that. I think it's important because we're writing the code, and we don't want another organization's mission statement defining the implementing code. And so I'm opposed to it because I think that if they want a residential use, which all of the instances that we've discussed examples are using it as a residence, they should just keep it as residential zoning. And that if they need something like a rectory or something that is tangent to the facility, that this provides for it, the operations of that facility. If it is tantamount to the organization to host a scholar, because that's part of the operations of the facility, they would be free to do that. I just don't want someone to have a mission statement that is 100% defined by them, defining our regulating code. So I would say it's a very dangerous, slippery slope for me to let someone else's mission statement be what guides staff in writing regulating code.
And see, that's where they wouldn't be. They would be taking the input from the community and from the applicants. The staff is not going to go write this code in isolation. So in my mind, that would accommodate that. The other scenario, and again, I'm trying to think on my feet in terms of what some of these different scenarios are. So if we're speaking about the specific opportunity in front of us, the French American School has purchased those single-family homes. Now, in the redesign, it all becomes part of this community facilities. I can also imagine that they make the determination to put whatever housing unit it is somewhere else on that entire parcel. And by requiring or assuming that they would then maintain that residential piece as is currently defined seems to be a constraint in terms of what might best suit the facility, arguably even the neighborhood, depending on if it's, I'm trying to think if it's an artist who focuses on drums or something like that, that you might want them closer inside versus closer to the neighborhood borders. So I'm still feeling like I'm supporting mission here with full confidence in the community and the applicants to focus this down in terms of the actual code writing.
I actually, I'm leaning towards operation, but I guess I can understand the concern about making it too, it sounds like the concern you might be having is that it's, I plugged in, I put down core operation. That probably doesn't help a whole lot, but I guess.
Almost makes it worse.
Okay, all right. But, yeah, mission statement of an organization or of an applicant, that is, could be very broad, and I'm a little hesitant about that. I guess I understand the point that, the regulations will help define what that all means, but, here we're talking about something that housing is to be limited and relate to the operation. So there's going to be a direct relationship to the purpose of that organization. It's just not, I'm probably not explaining it correctly, but operations strikes me as a little bit better term than mission. And I was trying to, elevate it by saying core operations, but that's probably not going to work. So at this point, I'm probably leaning towards operations.
Wendy?
I'm supportive of operations because I think it tightens it up a little bit and gives the code writers a little more specificity around working with the community and our applicants to figure out what that small piece of the proposal might be. I think given the very limited land that we have and the many groups that are wanting to figure out what to do with it, we're not building a multifamily unit for a number of purposes. So let's keep it to operations and let them define whether that's groundskeepers or visiting scholars or whatever. I think operations can tie to mission, and operation keeps it very clear and limited.
Could you clarify what you meant by multifamily? Because I would. I said no. Oh, okay. Because I was okay. Yeah. I guess let me simplify. My concern here is that this would allow somebody who is who provides facilities maintenance to live in that housing unit, but not somebody who is an academic scholar who's actually contributing to the operations of the facility. And I guess that's just the best example I can give right now for why I would not yet be comfortable to predetermine prior to the conversation with the community and with the applicants, and even amongst arguably a full council, whether or not that's truly the intent. But I can also see it might well be 3-1, and I accept. So unless anybody wants to change their mind.
Well, this is only a second reading, right? So.
Well, as you look at the motion, it actually suggests putting it on consent, which doesn't mean it has to be that way.
You're right.
But
You're right.
okay, so council, all in favor of replacing mission with operating, thumbs up. Those opposed? All right, so it changes to operations. All right, so
Actually-
returning more broad, oh, sorry, go ahead, Karen.
Excuse me, Mayor. So I'm not sure whether you can have a vote of just 3 constitute a majority of the council. So I'm looking at the RCW 35A.12.120 council quorum rules on voting. And it says that, and this is for our comp plan, obviously, but it says it requires the affirmative vote of a majority of the whole membership of the council.
So how does that impact the entire conversation tonight? Because, for example, where it's been 4-0, we're fine.
We're fine, right. This is the only time that I'm aware of tonight that it's come up where it's not 4-0. Is that correct? I believe that's correct.
Okay, so any event in any of
That's
these
correct.
elements, any of the conversations we have tonight that are not 4-0, then need to come back to full council. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct under state law.
Okay, so we'll need to also capture that when it is time to put forth a motion. Okay. All right. So it looks like we'll be returning to 27.5 when we can get a majority of council. Staying now with Amendment 8 for the time being, are there other comments, questions, edits? Wendy, anything? So, Evan, if just for the sake of my own enlightenment and potentially a few people out there in the public, if you could go back to your timeline. One of the questions I have is 27.1 through 27.8 essentially define 8 buckets. 8 buckets of concern regarding housing, regarding safety, regarding mitigation of transportation and parking. We could find ourselves, let's say, on January 24th, where somebody in the community comes up with a concern that does not specifically land in buckets 1 through 8. Would we just be out of luck, or what would actually be the process to capture their concern? The second question would be, do you, as a professional in land use, development, code, et cetera, can you think of any example that wouldn't be captured here?
Yeah, I appreciate the second question, Mayor. That's actually, so a couple parts to the response. In short, not now that I could identify that would make me think it's outside the fairly broad net those policies describe. Broad net of policy direction. The part of the thinking behind the October 11th exercise was to, again, hear from the community around very specific issues and look for things that would warrant an additional policy direction or an additional policy comment that I could bring to your attention tonight. Looking through that list, talking with my colleagues internally, I don't see anything that was brought up that would be along those lines. Most of the comments, most of the things I could imagine, if you will, would probably fall under the very broad statement of compatibility. So I've periodically used the example of maybe we don't like bright pink buildings. Okay. Compatibility is probably broad enough to even address the bright pink building.
Can you remind us which point would be the compatibility point?
I believe that would be 27.1, and that's on page 65 of your agenda bill.
Okay.
It's a very broad policy statement, and it's intended to be compatibility with the surrounding neighborhoods. I worked for a jurisdiction a number of years ago, the city of Sammamish, that had a International Society for Krishna Consciousness temple that was built on 228th Avenue. It's a cool looking building. It's bright pink, has gold domes on the top. And there was a lot of concern at that time around whether it was compatible with the residential neighborhood around it. Hence the example.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering those questions. It's built an extra degree of confidence that if something new, creative, and unexpected came forward, that you feel that there's high probability that we could capture code within that 27.1.
Yeah, and may I address something comes up with something totally off the wall that doesn't fall in that very broad. I don't know that would be not fair game at that point to address it, right? So the policy direction that we're trying to describe tonight is truly our starting point and describing where we want to go. I say bright pink, we conclude doesn't fit in compatibility, but is an issue. I think we could still craft code to address that and take another look at the policy question at a later date if it was germane. I wouldn't view the policy description that you're trying to craft in your comp plan as limiting in the way that I think you're thinking. This is a bit like saying we want to go, sorry for the analogy, I want to go on vacation, I want to go to the mountain. Okay, so we've agreed to that. That's the policy direction. Now I need to make a decision on which way I'm going to get off the island. Depending on the time of day and the traffic condition, I may go east or west. And that's what the regulations do. They provide the way to get to that direction.
Thank you. Okay, so council, Amendment 8. Any further comments, questions, given those few minutes to think and read? Okay. So I'm looking at Carrie for a little bit of guidance right now. So it seems to me that with regard to Amendment 8, we are going to have to come back to that when we have more council members and/or can get to a majority of council voting in support of. Is that correct?
Again, just to clarify, I don't mean to be so nitpicky, but you have a majority of the council seated here tonight.
No, I
you
know,
have a
but
quorum,
when we get a majority of the council voting in support of.
Yes, you do need
do not have
more
right now for
members
Amendment 8.
present. So you will need to bring that back, it looks like.
Do we need to bring the entirety of Amendment 8, or would we be focusing solely on 27.5?
Well, from my perspective, solely on 27.5, because that's the one item that didn't have the requisite number of votes for passage.
Okay. Evan?
May I clarify, Madam City Attorney?
Of course.
The ordinance adopting the comprehensive plan amendments is a single ordinance. 27.5 is, of course, a part of that ordinance. So we would need to address this as part of third reading regular business, though we might just focus on 27.5.
That's a very helpful clarification. Thank you. That's correct.
So can you translate what exactly that means come our next council meeting?
It means we have to bring this item back for a third reading to be cutting to the chase and concise.
Okay. All right. Well, council, what I'm hoping, though, is apart from that specific element of Amendment 8, we can go through the remaining list of comp plan amendments and find out if there's any additional questions or concerns. So we can then carry that forward, that great wisdom forward to our other colleagues when they return.
So in the interest of time, and Benson is so great at finding words that we tend to agree on, can we take 1 minute to see if there's some word between operations and mission that might help us land this tonight?
Sure.
May I ask a question of the council? We're hung up on and relate to the mission of, or and relate to the operations of. That's prefaced by housing uses shall be limited and be accessory to the primary facilities. We're really kind of talking about the allowance of when housing would be allowed on that site. And again, this is something I think the council has the ability to regulate as part of your actual regulations. I think the main point of this policy as I read it is that housing is limited and accessory to the primary use. And it's the caveat that the council is pausing on. I don't think you need to define the caveat tonight. I think that is part of your development regulation.
So you propose removing and relate?
I would suggest one possible option would be to say housing uses shall be limited and be accessory to the primary facility. And then how limited and what types of uses are allowed or not allowed is really a function of your code.
Can you repeat that, please?
Okay.
So you could revise 27.5 to read housing uses shall be limited and be accessory to the primary facility. And that would be capturing the main intent of that policy statement and delaying discussion on the caveat until you got to code where you could really define what you need.
I'm comfortable with that.
Very good, Evan.
Celine?
Less is more.
Okay.
Okay, all right, we got the
All right, so I'm just going to make sure, I'm going to read it out loud, make sure that we've got this. So 27.5, housing uses shall be limited and be accessory to the primary facility.
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Wendy and Evan saved the day. Okay. All right. So we have addressed Amendment 6. We have addressed Amendment 8. Council, any further comment on any of the other remaining, if I do the math, the other 12 amendments?
I've got a quick one on 11.
Okay?
So on page 68, on 21.2, roughly the middle of the page. So this is green building. So the changes around the word incentives, I know that we as a council talked about incentives when we were doing the RDS. Really, I have some heartburn about incentives being interpreted as increases to gross floor area, lot coverage, hardscape, or incentives around tree retention, replacement, protection, anything like that. So I don't have a problem with developing the program. So my thought is change the language to, so strike that creates incentives for, and replace it with to promote. So develop a green building program to promote residential development and construction that incorporates green building techniques. Develop a green building program to promote residential development and construction that incorporates green building techniques.
So Evan, does promotion include incentives?
I would assume so. There are a number of ways you can promote something or incentivize it. And I understand the deputy mayor's concern that there's some things that we don't want to use as incentives. I think the language is perfectly clear in terms of direction to staff on how to implement the program. If we were thinking of our Venn diagram, I'm not sure which circle is bigger, incentive or promote. Probably promote.
So you would think an incentive would be an element of promoting?
I would think so, yeah. Education would be another element. Information would be another element of promoting.
So Celine, what does that change your?
Well, to promote takes out 4 words, so that's less.
But what I heard is that promote actually includes incentives based on Evan's interpretation of it. So to promote could include more than just, it includes incentives, but it could include more than just.
As you get to the development regs that are much more specific.
Yeah, and I'm cognizant of the fact that I do want to see green building incentives.
Well, why not?
Programs. I mean, some of the things that Evan talked about were, for example, building height when a solar panel put it 3 inches over a building. We don't want to see somebody not put a solar panel on because of that. If that is considered an incentive, so be it. But I just don't want to call incentives out as the main guiding tenet in the comp plan. If we just promote it, maybe it's going to be in the implementing code that it gets flushed out.
The development regs.
Well, how about develop a green building program for residential development and construction to incorporate, so basically take all references to incentive and promotion out. So basically you are setting up as a policy the development of a green.
Well,
building
that'd be
program.
21.3.
Well, maybe,
It's a
I see
value.
21.3, that
It's an
subdivisions as being one of the key operatives. So I don't necessarily I don't think that would be the same.
I'm trying to get to the essence of 21.2 without the incentive and promotion. I mean, I'm okay with taking out incentive, but if you're going to put promotion, then we just heard Evan say that'll be interpreted just as another word for incentives.
Well, I mean, if you want to take to promote out and have develop a green building program for residential development and construction that incorporates building.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
Just do it.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
the essence.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, because we'll promote it and incentivize it anyway.
Okay, maybe on 4 thumbs.
All right.
Okay.
And may I just read it back to you to make sure I captured it correctly, Mayor? So the revised language for 21.2 would read, develop a green building program for residential development and construction that incorporates green building techniques.
Perfect.
Wendy? No, that's awesome. Okay. Great, so I think we have 4 thumbs up on that one, so we're still in the good city attorney zone. Anything else on this particular section?
No.
Anything else on any other amendment?
No.
If not, I would welcome a motion.
Who's got it?
I did put the staff recommended motion on the screen.
Yeah, I will. You ready?
Go for it.
Move to set ordinance numbers 18.13 and 18C-14 to November 20, 2018 for adoption on the consent calendar.
Second.
It's been first and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? None? Okay. We are done with this agenda item. Council staff, is there a need for a break?
No.
Well, I'm seeing some nods.
Oh,
Well,
no, it's okay. No.
okay, I think we're going to take a quick 5-minute break till 9:20. Okay, council, I think we will be resuming regular business. We have our last item of regular business, which is Agenda Bill 5491. It is our Code of Ethics and a first reading. And for this, we welcome Assistant to the City Manager, Allie Speeds.
Thank you, Council. Tonight, I am here to talk with you about the proposed Code of Ethics for officials. So I'll just walk you through that. Chapter 4223 RCW does have prohibited uses of public office, and they guide what elected officials can and cannot do. However, some cities adopt ethics codes that include additional restrictions which supplement but cannot conflict with state law. Mercer Island is committed to conducting its business in a fair and open, efficient, and accountable manner. Under City Council Goal Number 6, staff proposed adopting a code of ethics to demonstrate this commitment to transparency and to provide an outline of principles for elected and appointed officials to follow. So the proposed Code of Ethics for officials will be in Mercer Island City Code, Chapter 2.60. It will have a policy which states the purpose and intent of the Code of Ethics and defines official, which is city council members, boards and commission members, and any members that are appointed to city council task forces or committees. The code also reaffirms current state law regarding ethical behavior for appointed and elected officials. The code also refers to a statement that the City Council will adopt by resolution and that all officials will agree to comply with upon taking office or being appointed to their positions. It also has a section regarding complaints, which is a process for investigating a complaint against any official. The Code of Ethics statement has a series of tenets that some of them have a descriptor with them, but they are basically what we are asking officials to agree to, which is be dedicated to concepts of effective and democratic local government, affirm the dignity and worth of services rendered by the government, social responsibility as a trusted public servant, be dedicated to the highest ideals of honor and integrity in all public and personal relationships, recognize the chief function of local government as always to serve the best interests of its people, and then to keep the community informed on municipal affairs and encourage communications. Also to seek no favor. This section will also give additional information regarding business interests and contracts, private employment, confidential information, gifts, investments, investments in conflict with official duties, personal relationships, and business relationships. And also it will require that officials conduct business of the city in a manner which is not only in fair, but also in appearance. Fair in fact, but also in appearance, and not knowingly violate any Washington state law. So, just in addition to this, we do have a code of ethics for employees, and that establishes the ethical standards of conduct for all city employees. It is part of the employee handbook. Many employees, mostly your leadership team and professional staff, are also guided by ethical codes from our professional organizations of which we are members. And in addition, the Code of Ethics statement that you adopt will be incorporated into the employee handbook. So the employees will also be adhering to the same tenets. Following the adoption of the Code of Ethics, training will be scheduled for all City Council members, boards and commission members, and we will hope to get that done in the first quarter of 2019. Councilmember Wong sent an email today regarding a few amendments. And so a few of them I have taken the liberty at incorporating. One of them is to just make sure that we add council-appointed task groups or committees to the definition for officials in all the areas that we noted. Also, I revised the proposed code section to allow the ethics statement to be amended from time to time by the council. And then also add language to clarify that if a complaint is filed against the mayor will not participate in the investigation. So I am recommending that you set both the ordinance and the resolution to November 5th for second reading and adoption on the consent calendar, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Council, any questions? All right, well, I have one to start us off. It's my understanding that for all the council members, we take an oath, and arguably some of these ethical issues are addressed in the oath and subsequent pieces of paper that we sign, et cetera, that our boards and commissions, and to your credit, adding task force groups, et cetera, they have not had any sort of code of ethics that has defined their parameters. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. Washington, your oath of office says that you will abide by the laws of Washington State. When someone is appointed to a position on a board or commission, we do not have anything that regulates their ethical behavior.
So for all that we've had something that's addressed council, arguably, and has addressed our city staff, et cetera, the net new inclusion are these citizen boards and advisory groups and task forces and stuff like that?
Yeah, and in addition, just a few more guidelines that state laws are silent on.
Okay.
Or that state law has for state elected officials versus local elected officials. So there is a difference there, and that's why many cities adopt a code of ethics to kind of bring some of those local things back.
Thank you. Yeah, Benson.
Ally, thanks for making the changes.
Yeah.
I guess, when I went back and looked at my email, I think I threw in city manager and city attorney in it, and I realized later on that that was inappropriate because city attorney, if there's a complaint against the city attorney, that actually goes to the city manager to resolve. So the question I have is, if a complaint is filed against the city manager, how is that addressed?
Well, under the current written language, a complaint against the city manager could not be filed because the city manager is not in the definition of official.
Correct. And so what is the process, I guess? And I think as long as we keep the definition of official the way it is, city manager's not in there.
Correct.
I'm just asking a question. I don't know what the answer
I
is.
think city manager can explain. Yeah.
Mayor, in fact, I would recommend that you consider adding city manager among the list of officials defined.
The city manager is the one appointed official for the city. You are electeds, and city manager Underwood is appointed. So we could add city manager in there, and then all of this would apply just the same, and then we would add the city manager in under the complaint process.
So there would be no redundancies or conflicts with any other existing standards that we would need to worry about?
No, I mean, there are additional rules within 35A for the city council or council manager form of government, but that's covered under Julie's code of ethics that she follows. So.
Okay, so thumbs up from council in terms of including.
Question.
Yeah.
So right now, your professional organization that you belong to, if you violated code of ethics and somebody filed a complaint, would they have their own investigative procedure?
That is a great question. I am a member of the International City County Management Association, and as a member, I must adhere to the code of ethics, and there is an ethics committee that it's a real committee. They take complaints and they investigate those complaints, and they resolve those complaints. Bell, California is a great example. That city manager was a member and was kicked out and censored and everything. And so those do happen. Managers are censored. You tend to see things mostly around, I don't know why managers do this, but it's centered around endorsing a candidate, that sort of thing. So those are highly, highly unethical. And so they treat those pretty seriously. But there's a number of other issues around appearance. A lot of things that's already in this, in the draft ethics code around really this I'm not here to gain personally, right? You're not here to gain personally. So it's really a lot of that is about that your job is not for personal gain. And so a lot of our ethics is centered around that, conflicts of interest.
So it doesn't concern you that you might be subject to this form of review as well as your professional organization?
It looks very similar. Mm-hmm.
So question, if you resign from the professional organization, then, I guess I've never really, could you just resign from that professional organization?
Yeah, I
if you
guess. I mean, and there are, because it's not, it's an expensive group. It's not inconsequential membership fee. However, I'm also a member. So we do have a lot of managers in the state. There's a lot of smaller cities that can't afford to be members in ICMA. I'm also a member of the Washington City County and we pretty much have the same code of ethics as ICMA. So you're going to be covered one way or another. Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, then I'm supportive of adding Julie to this as list of officials.
Yeah. Council Benson?
And this is me, and it's probably because I was looking at it late. I raised a question about the formatting of the code of ethics. If people are okay with it, I'm good. When I looked at it, it just looked kind of strange, that's all.
Is there a specific concern you have?
Just the format, it just didn't.
Remember, Ally, did we send that to the council?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
So the reasoning for having kind of that second heading within the statement was just to make things stand out, like gifts, personal relationships. The tenant is much more of your, your nice statement versus the actual things we want you to follow. So I'm happy to change that if you'd like. We just were trying to kind of give some headers in there that referred to very specific situations.
If people are fine with that, it's fine. When I just read it, it just struck me as a little odd, that's all.
Okay.
People are okay with it, it's fine.
I think if you're okay with it, I think we're okay with it. Are there any other questions? Any other suggestions?
Just a quick question. As new board members cycle in after this training is done for the council and all the existing, how will you plan on implementing training for new board members?
Well, each person will have to sign this statement when they take their position. And probably what we'll do is we'll do a training maybe in September. Summers are always difficult here, but maybe in September, a few months after they've taken their positions for all the new board members. And then just make sure we catch everybody that's new and try and offer this once a year. For this first one, we will, and it'll be a lot more people, so we'll probably have a little bit of a different format versus maybe the subsequent ones when it's just a smaller group.
Well, if somewhere along the lines there's a facilitator and we could videotape it, if that,
definitely.
I'm sure the first one won't be the right one because it'll be too many people, but
yeah,
if that happens, maybe it's a good idea.
Okay.
So let's say that we follow the recommended timeline for this, which is it then goes to consent and it passes. Would we be asking all board members, commissioners, task force, et cetera, come January 1st or immediate? When would this be put in front of them?
It will go into effect 5 days after publication. So
Do they have to sign anything, or is this? Okay.
Yeah, this statement that's in there has a line at the bottom for their name and signature and their title, what they're serving in. It's the same thing that we need to do with open government training for every board and commission member. So it will become routine and easy once we have new members coming on. It'll just be part of our process. But I would imagine by the end of the year, we'll probably try and get everybody to get that statement signed.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask the unthinkable. What if somebody refused to sign it?
Then I believe that that would be up to the mayor to decide, especially if it's the boards and commission members, because everybody serves at the pleasure of the mayor. I hate that term, but that's what our code says, so.
Okay. Just want to make sure we're not.
And it's actually mayor and deputy mayor since we added that, so.
That's a good question. I thought we, in our requirements, I have to go back and look at, I thought we had them sign the code of ethics. I'll have to go back and look.
Are you talking about in the language we're preparing for the count? Oh, yeah, that's in there, but Mayor Bertlin is talking about in this in-between time, when this gets adopted and before the new code's adopted for boards and commissions.
Okay, well, there's no further conversation. I would welcome a motion.
I move to set ordinance number 18C-15 and resolution number 1548 to November 5, 2018 for second reading and adoption on the consent calendar.
And that would also capture including city manager as well, correct?
With the amendment adding city manager as official.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any conversation? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Motion passes. That concludes regular business for this evening. We now move on to other business. We have two council members who are absent this evening, Councilmember Wiesentiner and Councilmember Bassett. Is there a motion to excuse their absence?
So moved.
It's been moved and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, they are excused. Planning calendar, planning schedule. For that, we have our city manager.
So council, I know we were intending to devote October 23rd entirely to the operations budget, but we have since added a study session at 5 p.m. It is regarding the King County Sewer Project, and they are moving to 90% design, so we really need to come back to council and consult with you regarding the restoration of the Aubrey Davis Park Trail. So as you know, they will, because of the project, they will disturb the trail, and our goal is to have them restore that trail, but to a higher standard, potentially. So we want to discuss that with the council. And so we've scheduled a study session from 5 to 6 in advance of the operating budget discussion. So want to note that for you. And then for others who may not be aware, we are hosting a special reception for Representative Claiborne on November 26th. At 5:30 to 7 p.m. We really want to recognize and show our appreciation for her many years of service to the state and, of course, to the city of Mercer Island. And so you are hosting a reception, so we want others to mark their calendar for that event as well. Those are the couple items I thought I would mention. Any questions?
Council, any question, any comments? It's a busy couple months coming up. Okay. There are no board appointments this evening, so that moves us on to council member reports. We'll start with Wendy. Oh. Okay, Benson.
Okay, well, actually I had a few, but I'm just going to reduce it to one. I emailed to everybody, I don't know, I'm hoping that you had a chance to look at the SCA 2019 legislative agenda. The Public Issues Committee, at the next meeting, they were hoping to basically find out from the member cities what city councils approved this legislative agenda. And so I was hoping to be able to say, yes, Mercer Island approves this agenda. So.
It looks good.
Yeah, basically, a lot of it's carryover. It's address affordable housing, invest in transportation infrastructure, and to provide tools for the cities to address critical local priorities. And these are pretty much carryover items. So I don't know if people have issues.
Should we send you questions or concerns?
Well, don't you have your meeting next week?
Yeah, well, it's not till the second week of November, I think.
Okay, so there's still some time.
But, yeah, but they were, if we can get thumbs up, it'd be.
So do you need a thumbs up
It'd be
tonight?
great. It'd be, yes, I was hoping to get a thumbs up.
Ah, okay.
You didn't read it?
All right. while Salim's reading, then I'll just go ahead and give my update. I was fortunate last week to have been invited to sit on a panel sponsored by the city of Seattle. It was focused on partnerships, and it was very interesting because it included myself, it included Lime, so the Director for Government Affairs for Lime, and also the president of the Municipal League. So it was a fascinatingly different group of people, but I think all of us agree that partnerships are really inherent in the way we do business, and particularly with Seattle, this context of regionalization becomes quite important. So that was kind of fun. Also at ETP, the Eastside Transportation Partners on Friday, 2 important elements. The first one is we had a presentation on what they're calling the period of maximum constraint. And the period of maximum constraint regards to transportation and a number of infrastructure projects that are going on that will actually cover up to the next 5 years. So it's an extended period of maximum constraint. I've been talking to city manager to see if we can't have at least some version of that presented, because it goes through the timeline of really important factors such as the viaduct coming down, buses out of the tunnel, some of the additional capacity and information channels that all these different transportation agents are going to be using to make sure that people are informed. The other thing is the ETP legislative agenda will also be coming forward to council, probably get a draft out to you in the next few days. It's largely the same as last year. And then the final call out I would make to fellow council members is the application period for SCA boards and appointments and commissions is actually been moved forward, and it is this month. I think October 31st is the deadline.
So we usually hash that out internally before we submit to SCA. Do you want to take those priorities?
That is actually a very good point. Thank you for remembering that. Yeah, if you could send me the boards and commissions task forces that you plan to apply to, please let me know. And then if I see any conflicts, I'll deal with them as they come up. So thank you for that. That's great. Okay, so we're now returning to Benson and the SCA draft ledge priorities. Thumbs up? Okay, thumbs up. Salim, did you have anything that you wanted to call out? No reports. Okay, well with that, it is 9:46 and council is adjourned.